Cool Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the Yao Ming of Revolution. You know, revolution is a way of life. Hold on. Well, Putin is absolutely saving us. Saving us from the head choppers, saving us from the NATO Nazis. Let me get this video lined up. Y'all be sure to wipe y'all feet. That means hit the like button, like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. Hold on, give me 1 second. Salute, family, salute. You know, we got to get into this information because, you know, there's a lot of distractions going on right now, but World War III is definitely still on the table. Y'all not out the file. You know, President Putin is protecting the Christians. It's still here, revolutionary salute. He's protecting us here. These lunatics want us dead. We know they want depopulation. There's too many, what they call us, useless eaters, revolutionary salute. We eating too much. Y'all know that? That's what they said about us, man. You know? So they want Putin to kill everybody, revolutionary salute, brother. Your packages will be to you beginning of this week too, brother. So revolutionary salute to everybody. Let's get right into this. Let's hear the revolutionary OG, the man, the myth, the legend, speak himself, because why I started this presentation with what Putin is saying, because he's saying he'll use more powerful weapons if NATO don't cease and desist to BS.
Good evening. Please, what questions do you have? Good evening, Pavel Zarubin, Russia TV channel. We are increasingly hearing statements and discussions from abroad from political scientists and officials that the conflict in Ukraine could be ended next year, and everyone is wondering how. And Trump's team is discussing. We have a saying among the people, we should drink honey with your lips. We are also striving to end the conflict. And Trump's team is talking, and they are directly stating that the conflict could be frozen on the condition of a guaranteed delay of 10 to 20 years from Ukraine's entry into NATO. How do you like this formula? And who is saying this? The Trump administration. There are also discussions there with reference to the special envoy for the Ukrainian crisis on this matter. I see. I don't know what the forming team of the elected president of the United States is saying now. I know that the current President Biden told me about this. It is not a secret. Back in 2021, he proposed exactly this to me. To delay Ukraine's admission to NATO for 10 to 15 years. Because it is not ready now. To which I reasonably replied, well, yes, it is not ready today, but you will prepare it and accept it into NATO. In terms of historical distances and timeframes, this is an instant. For us, what difference does it make today, tomorrow, or in 10 years? And in this sense, I am not familiar with these statements by the future team of the elected president. But if this is so, then what is the difference between the current administration and the proposals you just mentioned? There is no difference. I do not know how this situation will develop further and what the instructions from the elected president will be to his colleagues in the administration. We will see. Yes, please, Andre. Commercant newspaper. Vladimir Vladimirovich, tell me, do you expect anything else for yourself and, most importantly, from yourself before the end of the year? This is a vague question. What do you mean by from myself? Andre, I don't really understand what you mean by from myself. I don't expect anything special for myself. I consider myself a predictable, balanced person, acting according to a plan. This plan of all my actions, the actions of the government, the administration, the central bank, we coordinate all our steps among ourselves, and we act quite stably and predictably. We don't predict anything unusual. It's impossible to predict anything unusual. Someone is waiting for the Orshnik rocket to land, for example. You understand. We always respond in kind. They use certain weapons against us. We use the same. Well, listen. They used 5 to 7 ATACMS missiles. Did you hear what was said yesterday or the day before? The Russian army responded with a comprehensive strike of 240 or 221 missiles.
Talk your
High
shit.
precision, long-range weapons. If we need to, if we see.
He said they fired 5 attackers, 5 missiles, and he fired 200 and something at them. He ain't playing.
That more powerful medium-range weapons are required. Of course, we will use them. But we are in no hurry. It is not a secret. We do not hide it, and I have already said that we do not have mini Orshnik missiles yet. But we do have them, and not just one system. But we are in no hurry to use them, because these weapons are powerful. They are designed to solve specific problems. We have started serial production. Now we will produce the amount we need. We will place something on the territory of Belarus. We act systematically. But we do not exclude the possibility of using them today and tomorrow, if such a need arises. Please, I beg you. Vladimir Vladimirovich, a leap year is ending, and, as befits a leap year, it was difficult. What would you like to see next year? What is the most important thing for you? If we talk about Russia, of course, the most important thing is the well-being of the Russian people, the standard of living, stability. In the economic sphere, this is the stabilization of inflation so that we do not have any ups and downs. So that our economic growth continues. My colleagues and I have already agreed on everything regarding this growth. We do not plan for it to be the same as this year, almost 4%. As strange as it may sound, given the macroeconomic realities, we do not need such growth yet. Although, of course, the more, the better, it would seem. But all this must happen within the framework of compliance with macroeconomic parameters. Otherwise, some distortions in the economy occur, which in the long run can ultimately harm us. Therefore, our proposals and plans are balanced. We have a balanced macroeconomic policy. We are counting on further growth in the population's income. Of course, we proceed from the fact that we will solve all the tasks of the special military operation. This is generally the #1 task. We will support our guys. We are talking to you, and they are fighting. You know, I won't talk about details now, about specific sections of the front, but when I take an interest, and I do this every day, day and night, in the literal sense of the word, in certain sections, certain events occur. Our guys force water obstacles. Somewhere they do it with the help of technical means, and somewhere without them. I ask the commanders, how do the guys overcome this water obstacle? Waiting. We are standing here, it's warm here, it's windy outside, and here it's warm and light. And the guys are waiting. What is this? They are wading chest deep in water, and they carry machine guns over their heads. They are fighting for Russia. We proceed from the fact that we will achieve success on the line of combat contact. And we will achieve those successes, solutions to those problems in the economic sphere, and it is the basis of everything, and solutions to social issues, military security issues, security in the broadest sense of the word. We will move in accordance with the outlined plans. I have reason to believe that everything will be so. You are welcome. Hello, Vladimir Vladimirovich. Happy upcoming holiday to you. UNICEF, Life Agency. You yourself just said that you are constantly in touch with the commanders, day and night. So, you have the most complete information about the situation on the line of combat contact. Yes, the most complete or not. It is difficult to say, but quite a lot. And you have developed intuition. We have noticed this. What do you believe in for yourself? Do you believe that in 2025 the conflict will end? Naturally, with our victory, I believe in God, and God is with us. What else? You are welcome. TASS Agency, Yulia Bubnova. We would like to ask about Robert Fitzo's visit to us. He came last weekend. Could you tell us what we managed to agree on? Did you manage to resolve the gas issue with gas supplies to Slovakia and Europe in general? And is it true that he offered his country as a platform for negotiations with Trump? If so, what did you tell him? Thank you. You know, as a rule, we do not make public what we talk about if we agree not to tell the press what we agree on. But I think that Mr. Fitzo will not be offended by me. Yes, indeed, he said that if the negotiations are on a peaceful settlement, I want to emphasize that Mr. Fitzo, I do not know. He may have some squabbles with the current Ukrainian leadership, with someone else, in the European Union. Not everything is going well there in terms of mutual understanding. But he first and foremost spoke about a peaceful settlement in the Ukrainian direction. He is in favor of this, as they say. He called for this. So, I don't know what claims could be made against him by Europe or anyone else. But this is exactly what he talked about. This is what he focused on. First. Second, regarding the venue for the negotiations. Yes, he said that if it comes to negotiations, they would be happy to provide his country's venue for such negotiations. And we are not against this. If it comes to this, why not? Because Slovakia takes a neutral position. From our point of view, this position is neutral, and this is an acceptable option for us. Regarding agreements in the energy sector, we have always been in favor of gas supplies. We have always been in favor of depoliticizing economic issues. We have never refused to supply gas to Europe. Have we refused? I have said it 1,000 times. I can repeat. Poland closed the route through its territory. There is an active route there. No one destroyed it. There are no explosions there. It is active. You only need to turn on the button, and that's it. And the gas will go through the territory of Poland. It is called Yamal Europe.
They're going to blow that up now. Mark my word, now that he said that, because he did that for a reason, the U.S. going to blow that up. They're not going to let Poland get put in power by dealing Russian gas. Putin wants that pipeline blew up to punish Poland. That's why he said it.
It goes directly through the territory of Poland. Please turn it on tomorrow, and we will supply gas.
Revolutionary way of life.
Another route goes through the territory of Ukraine. War is war, but we supplied gas regularly. We paid for it, and we are still paying. By the way, we pay money for the transit of gas. So what? Ukraine took two routes there, through Sudza and through Sokranovka. Our troops took control of Sokranovka, and for 6 months, in my opinion, even if not more, everything functioned peacefully. And there were Ukrainian specialists at that checkpoint. They worked there. No one offended them. No one touched them. They functioned there calmly, and everything was fine. Then, for some reason, it occurred to someone in Kiev that they needed to close it. They closed it, under the pretext that Russian troops were controlling it. Well, yes, but what were you thinking 6 months ago? Everything was working, so there must have been some other reasons. I don't understand what those reasons were. Now about Sudza, there are military actions there. The pipeline is actually under Ukrainian control, but we simply continue to supply gas at 14 million cubic meters per day. Do you understand? Nevertheless, despite the fact that they now control Sudza, they announced that they would not extend the transit contract. It wasn't us who said that we were ending it, but they who announced that they would not extend the contract. If they don't, then we don't need it. They are pecking at Europe's hand, as I have already said, because without European support Ukraine not only cannot fight, but also cannot exist. But now they are punishing the same Europe by closing the transit contract for the supply of our gas to Europe. It is not easy for Europe. The price of gas there has already risen to $500 per 1,000 cubic meters. Now we are talking, and I am telling you that there is no contract, and it is impossible to conclude it in.
See what Putin's saying, Zelensky is blackmailing Europe. Putin is saying it's a pipeline still going from Russia through Ukraine. We're paying Ukraine to let the gas flow to Europe. We don't mind sending some gas to Europe. We don't want all the Europeans to freeze to death. Ukraine is now saying, hell no, they don't need none of that, because the U.S. is telling them to do that, because the U.S. want Europe to get their gas double and triple the price from the U.S.
In 3 or 4 days, there will be none. Prices will rise again there. But we are not provoking this. This is their policy, right? And what is the problem? They announced this, that there would be no contract, that they would not renew it. And then they realized that this was a problem for them. They started to fuss. What did their fuss begin to express itself in? They started to contact, in fact, everyone in a row, so that someone instead of Naftogaz of Ukraine would sign a contract with us for this transit through the territory of Ukraine, so that the gas would go to their border under the control of Gazprom and through the territory of Ukraine under someone else's control, so that the relevant structures of Hungary, Slovakia, Turkey, Azerbaijan would sign a contract for transit through the territory of Ukraine and at the border of Ukraine and Europe, so that Gazprom would again sort things out with its partners. The problem is that Gazprom has long-term contracts until 2035 and until 2049. And in order to change the situation related to transit, these contracts must be changed. This is a very complicated procedure. It is a difficult procedure to resolve, unresolvable, firstly. And secondly, there is one more thing. I am telling you this in such detail so that there is no speculation. You know what we are talking about. Ukraine has closed one of the routes through the territory of Ukraine for gas supplies to Europe. The route through Sokranovka. They closed it, that's all. And we have a ship or pay contract with them. They closed the route, and then they filed a lawsuit against us in court demanding payment for what was not transiting through Ukraine. Gazprom asked them, "Are you crazy or what? You closed this transit." They answered, "Well, we closed the route, but you still pay us money. This is some kind of nonsense." Now they say, "Let a third party carry out transit through our territory." And they don't want to withdraw the lawsuit from the arbitration court. What will happen? It will turn out that you and I and more than 100 other people, 150 million people, Russian citizens, will supply gas to any European country. But according to the decision of the arbitration court in the so-called non-acceptance order, this money will be withdrawn from us. It will not come to us, but it will go to Ukraine to pay off Ukraine's claim against Gazprom. Well, that's nonsense. We can't allow that. We said that we would supply gas, even if it was Azerbaijan's Sokar, or a Turkish company, or a Hungarian or Slovak one. But let the Ukrainians withdraw this lawsuit from the court. What kind of nonsense is that? They said no, they won't withdraw the lawsuit. Well, then go ahead and shave. Live without our gas. We need to finish. You have a red tie. It's for the new year. Thank you. Nikolai Ivanov, Izvestia newspaper, Vladimir Vladimirovich. The Foreign Intelligence Service reported the following at the beginning of the week. Don't scare us, we're already meek. The Foreign Intelligence Service reported that Moldova could become a new hotspot on the map. The Foreign Ministry said the day before that there would be an attempt to destabilize the situation in Belarus, naturally, with the help of the West. Maybe this is a naive question. What should we do to stop these attempts to set our borders on fire? We need to be strong. Happy New Year. All the best. Goodbye.
On December 26, 2024, while the whole world was discussing the crash of an Azerbaijan Airlines passenger jet in the Kazakh city of Aktau, Russian radars and tracking devices detected the launch of enemy air-to-air missiles over the southern part of Ukraine. Later it turned out that these missiles were launched by 12 warplanes of the Ukrainian Air Force. It is reliably known that several American F-16 fighter jets were also among these combat planes. In this regard, the air alert was announced in several Russian regions. In particular, independent monitoring services reported an air alert in the Zaporizhia, Kherson, Krasnodar, Oryol, and Rostov regions, as well as in the Lugansk and Donetsk People's Republics. Simultaneously with this, the Russian authorities temporarily closed almost all airports in the Central Federal District, including in cities such as Kaluga and Moscow. According to the Kremlin, this is done because Ukrainian drones deliberately attack civilian airports and passenger airliners. Later, on the morning of December 27, the first details of the attack on Russian regions by 12 combat planes began to appear in the information space. In particular, the committee chairman of the Public Chamber of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Rogov, officially stated that on December 26, 2024, during an attempt to launch missile strikes on Russian regions, the Ukrainian Air Force lost one F-16 fighter jet. Vladimir Rogov noted that this American fighter jet was destroyed over the Zaporizhia region. At the same time, the committee chairman of the Public Chamber of the Russian Federation did not specify exactly how the American fighter jet was destroyed. Moreover, this information was also confirmed by the Ukrainian Telegram channels. In particular, they stated that yesterday, during a combat sortie, the Ukrainian Air Force lost at least one F-16. It is worth noting that American journalists also raised this topic during the Pentagon briefing. The journalists asked a U.S. Department representative to comment on the downed F-16 Fighting Falcon information. In response, a Pentagon spokesman said that the United States had no information on this matter, and advised reporters to wait for an official statement from the Minister of Defense of Ukraine. Meanwhile, a number of reputable Russian Telegram channels, citing their own sources in the Russian Defense Ministry, stated that on December 26, an American F-16 was destroyed by the latest Russian Su-57M fighter jet, equipped with a new generation flat nozzle engine AL-51F1. According to them, the destruction of the American F-16 occurred northeast of the city of Zaporizhia, at the very moment when this fighter jet was trying to launch the Franco-British Storm Shadow cruise missiles. It is reported that to destroy the American fighter jet, the pilot of the Russian Su-57M used the world's longest-range aircraft missile Or-37M, capable of hitting targets at a distance of more than 300 kilometers. The destruction of an American fighter jet in the skies over Zaporizhia was also confirmed by the authoritative edition of the Eurasian Times. Moreover, experts and analysts of this publication also stated that thanks to the activities of a network of Russian agents in Ukraine, Moscow has collected quite extensive and valuable information about the location of all American fighter jets in Ukraine. Experts from the Eurasian Times claim that as of December 2024, Russians know not only the exact location of the American fighter jets, but also the location of the remaining Ukrainian and Western air defense systems. By the way, this information was also confirmed by an authoritative military expert and retired Colonel, Anatoly Matvichuk. In particular, he said that thanks to valuable information received from Russian agents, on December 20, 2024, during a massive missile attack on Ukraine, the Russian military managed to destroy another American F-16 fighter jet, this time in the vicinity of the Borispol airfield. Thus, within 1 week, Russia managed to destroy 2 American F-16 fighters. According to Aviation Major General, honored pilot of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Popov, the destruction of 4 F-16 fighter jets has been confirmed from the beginning of the hostilities in Ukraine. At the same time, he admitted that this figure is significantly underestimated, and that the Ukrainian Air Force lost a lot more American fighter jets. According to him, the systematic destruction of American combat planes in Ukraine is due to 3 factors: targeted Russian missile strikes, the work of Russian air defense systems, and combat sorties of the latest Russian 5th-generation Su-57 fighter jets. Major General Vladimir Popov noted that the transfer of F-16 fighters to Ukraine was the biggest strategic mistake of the United States. The conflict in Ukraine has shown the world the vulnerability of American fighters to modern Russian air defense systems and combat planes. And this became a real reputational blow to the United States. For decades, the Americans have successfully used their fighter jets against deliberately weak rivals. However, the conflict in Ukraine has shown the whole world that Western military equipment has no chance against a modern and professional army, Major General Vladimir Popov said. Famous Ukrainian journalist Anatoly Sherry also commented on the destruction of an American F-16 in the skies over Zaporizhia. In particular, he said that American F-16 fighters turned out to be helpless not only against Russian air defense systems and Su-57 fighter jets, but also cruise missiles. According to him, during the entire period of the participation of F-16 fighters in combat operations in Ukraine, these American warplanes failed to shoot down even one Russian cruise missile. Anatoly Sherry notes that American fighter jets rarely fly combat missions. According to the Ukrainian journalist, American fighter jets are not involved in offensive operations, but are used exclusively for defensive purposes, which is a humiliating factor for the entire West. By the way, after yesterday's destruction of the F-16, Belgium refused to transfer to Ukraine the promised 30 units of these American fighter jets. Let me remind you that earlier, Belgian Defense Minister Ludovine de Donder promised that Brussels would transfer the first batch of combat planes, consisting of 15 units of F-16 fighters to Ukraine, by the end of this year. However, official Brussels has now announced that the transfer of the F-16 fighter jets to Kiev has been postponed indefinitely.
This global policy the US has toward maintaining its primacy and the prevention of the emergence of multipolarism, which is just a balance of power between nations, the elimination of Western hegemony and a balance of power between nations. It does not mean the collapse of the collective West. It just means the collective West has to work alongside the rest of the world rather than impose itself upon the rest of the world. So let me read through this article. As I always do, I will show you the sources that I am citing, and I will add in additional information when and if necessary. So I will begin. The collapse of the Syrian government in mid-December 2024 has fulfilled a prerequisite for several of Washington's geopolitical objectives, including the subsequently planned disarming, division, and destruction of Iran and the toppling of the Iranian government. The possible eviction of Russian military bases in Syria, which I think is almost inevitable, and the use of US-sponsored terrorist organizations utilized in overrunning Syria to then export terrorism to the other targeted nations, both in the region and far abroad, including both Russia and China. And the US is already using terrorist organizations to target both Russia and China. I will get into a little bit of that here in just a moment, but let's continue. Let's talk about how the collapse of Syria was not some random occurrence that the US just took advantage of. It is something the US has been working on for decades and decades, and it has been investing heavily in this over the years, and it has now finally succeeded. And so I go over the evidence of all of that. The US has repeatedly attempted to undermine and overthrow the government of Syria since at least as early as the 1980s. This most recent attempt began preparations as early as 2007, as revealed in a New Yorker article published that year titled The Redirection. That is this article. If you've not read this article, you need to. It is essential to understand what happened in Syria and what the US was doing years before this all apparently began. People think this all began with the Arab Spring. They think the US co-opted the Arab Spring. No, the US was training, equipping political activists to initiate the Arab Spring years before it sprung. And they were preparing militants alongside the political activists to use the political instability as cover to initiate the violent overthrow of all of these targeted countries the US wanted to overthrow and install client regimes in, or just leave broken and destroyed. So continuing, written by legendary journalist Seymour Hersh, the article admitted to undermine Iran, which is predominantly Shia, the Bush administration has decided, in effect, to reconfigure its priorities in the Middle East. In Lebanon, the administration has cooperated with Saudi Arabia's government, which is Sunni, in clandestine operations that are intended to weaken Hezbollah, the Shia organization that is backed by Iran. The U.S. has also taken part in clandestine operations aimed at Iran and its ally, Syria. Byproduct of these activities has been the bolstering of Sunni extremist groups that espouse a militant vision of Islam and are hostile to America and sympathetic to al-Qaeda, but hostile to America only superficially. In reality, the U.S. has created these organizations. They radicalized the members of these organizations, and they have used them for decades and decades to both serve as a pretext for the U.S. to invade any given nation, but also use them as a proxy to attack targeted nations the U.S. cannot invade and occupy. Also that year, the U.S. State Department had already been training, equipping, and funding opposition groups to return to their nations across the Arab world and overthrow their respective governments as part of what would later be referred to as the Arab Spring. So this is 2007 still. The New York Times would reveal in a 2011 article titled U.S. Groups Helped Nurture Arab Uprisings. I've gone over this article many, many times, and they try to act as if all of these uprisings are organic, but the U.S. just helped a little bit. But as you read the article, it becomes obvious. If you're objectively reading it, it was all funded by the U.S. government through all of these subsidiaries of the National Endowment for Democracy, which they mentioned down here, and they admit is overseen and funded by Congress and the U.S. State Department. All of these subsidiaries, the International Republican Institute, the National Democratic Institute, Freedom House, and they also mention down here some Egyptian youth leaders attended a 2008 technology meeting in New York where they were taught to use social networking and mobile technologies to promote democracy. Now, to overthrow the respective governments as the U.S. State Department trained them. And it admits in the article that among those sponsoring these technology meetings was the State Department. I say meetings plural because it wasn't just in 2008. This had been going on for years, before 2008 and ever since 2008, and it continues up until today. And this particular forum I am not sure if it still exists, but a lot of this has been transferred over to the Oslo Freedom Forum, which is also funded by the US government, and is the same process of gathering opposition groups the US is backing around the globe, gathering them all in one area so they can train them, equip them, support them, send them back to their country to overthrow their respective governments. This is what the US has been doing for years and years. And the Western media admits it. It's admitted. This is not some sort of hidden secret. They don't emphasize this. They conveniently omit this when they talk about the collapse of these governments. When they finally do fall, they retrospectively claim that it was a revolution, when in fact it was just US-backed regime change. US interference has nothing to do with democracy. Following the initial protests of the 2011 Arab Spring, US-sponsored regime change quickly and deliberately turned violent before transforming into a multitude of armed conflicts, some of which involved overt US military intervention, including in Libya, Syria, and Yemen. We have to remember the US was involved in the fighting in Yemen. The US backed Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia was essentially fighting a war for the US. The US was doing every single step of the fighting except getting into the fighter planes and pushing the buttons. Those were Saudi pilots, so we're told. Everything else was being done by the US, including US and European ground crews helping repair the aircraft and manage the munitions, pick targets, and there were Western special forces on the ground in Yemen helping designate targets. By 2012, so a year after the Arab Spring began, after years of the US engineering it quietly, a US Defense Intelligence Agency report about US-sponsored regime change in Syria specifically, published by Judicial Watch, admitted that the so-called Syrian opposition consisted of Salafists, the Muslim Brotherhood, and Al-Qaeda. And all three of these extremist groups were either created by the British Empire or by the United States since then. And they have been used to divide and conquer the Arab world. The report admitted that the West, this is a direct quote, the West, Gulf countries, and Turkey support the opposition. And it also said, if the situation unravels, there is the possibility of establishing a declared or undeclared Salafist principality. And that this is exactly what the supporting power of the opposition, the West, Gulf countries, and Turkey want in order to isolate the Syrian regime. So Salafist principality is just another way of saying Islamic State. And that was in 2012, before the Islamic State exploded across headlines. The US Defense Intelligence Agency was talking about creating a Salafist principality in Syria, I guess also in Iraq, specifically to isolate Syria and to facilitate regime change, US-backed regime change. It's very clear that the Salafist principality referred to the so-called Islamic State. While the West posed as intervening in Syria to eliminate the Islamic State, it was actually supporting and using it precisely to isolate the Syrian regime, just as the US Defense Intelligence Agency report noted back in 2012. Through a combination of sanctions, US-Israeli military strikes, and this happened over many years, US and Turkish military occupation, including of Syria's oil and wheat fields. I've gone over US Defense Department Dana Stroll and her comments about how the US was holding Syrian oil and wheat specifically to hollow out the Syrian economy. To the war that the US engineered and initiated left Syria in rubble, and the US was deliberately preventing reconstruction to eventually collapse Syria. And it worked. It did work. This was a huge failure for Russia and Iran. There's no two ways about it. Syria was slowly hollowed out, and as of December 2024, with Russia and Iran overextended elsewhere, finally toppled. So let's talk about how the toppling of Syria isn't just one isolated geopolitical event that the US took advantage of. It is a step in a larger process to then topple Iran and then eventually go after Russia and China. So most obviously, just as with the US engineered overthrow of Libya in 2011, Syria will persist as a failed and divided state the US and its regional proxies use to export terrorism across the region toward what remains of Iran's asymmetrical military power, including Hezbollah in Lebanon and Iranian-backed militias across Iraq. Syria can also be used as a staging ground for attacks on Iran itself, including via the use of Syria's now unprotected airspace. One crucial obstacle eliminated with the collapse of Syria's government was the destruction of its military hardware, including a formidable integrated air defense network. Even as U.S. Turkish-backed terrorists advanced on Damascus, U.S.-armed Israeli warplanes carried out hundreds of airstrikes across the country, both eliminating the abandoned air defense systems themselves and a long list of targets those air defenses had long prevented Israel from striking. The Times of Israel itself, in this article here, IDFC's chance for striking on Iran nuke sites after knocking out Syria air defenses. And something that I'm going to also add here is that the previous Israeli strikes on Israel, the Israelis claim they flew through Syrian airspace. Obviously, they didn't, because the air defense systems would have prevented them from doing so. They carried out standoff strikes on Syria as an alibi, claiming that that was part of going through Syrian airspace, then going into Iraqi airspace and attacking Iraq. What they actually almost certainly did was go through Jordanian airspace. But the U.S. wants to maintain the illusion that Jordan is not just an outright U.S. proxy and isn't working side by side with Israel, another U.S. proxy. And so Jordan allowing Israel to pass through its airspace to attack another nation in the region, that would be looked upon very poorly by the region. And so that's why they lied to help Jordan save face. Israel lied to help Jordan save face, because they are both proxies working for the U.S. ultimately. So that's important to understand. So the Times of Israel itself, in this article that I just showed you, connected Israel's targeting and destruction of Syrian air defenses with plans to then carry out direct strikes on Iran. The article itself points this out. It says, according to the military, the Israeli Air Force destroyed 86% of former Assad regime's air defense systems across Syria, totaling 107 separate air defense components and another 47 radars. The numbers include 80% of the short to medium range SA-22, also known as the Pantsir S-1, and 90% of the Russian SA-17 medium range air defense system, also known as the Bu. These airstrikes reveal just how effective Russian-made air defense systems were, having previously forced Israel and the United States to rely on standoff strikes on targets in Syria and forcing Israeli warplanes to circumvent Syrian airspace during recent missions targeting Iran itself. And I explained why they almost certainly circumvented Syrian airspace, despite claiming they flew through it. The article admits, however, that now the Israeli Air Force can operate freely across the country's skies and will likely do so both as part of shaping chaos inside Syria itself, as well as amid future strikes on Iran. Far from simply exploiting recent unexpected developments, the elimination of Syria as an ally of Iran was a long-standing prerequisite required and planned for before moving on to toppling Iran itself. Such plans were published by U.S. government and arms industry funded Brookings Institution in its 2009 paper, which Path to Persia: Options for a New American Strategy Toward Iran. That is this document here. The link is in the video description below. I highly suggest people read this. I know it's long. I know it's pedantic and boring and dry, but this is literally the U.S. government's playbook for undermining and overthrowing any government. It happens to specifically be about Iran, but every single step described in this paper has been used on other nations as well, including Syria. And if you look at the options, you will understand this. They have sanctions and fake negotiations, outright invasions, airstrikes to take out military capabilities, having Israel carry out strikes on America's behalf, the color revolution, backing terrorism. I mean, this chapter 7 says inspiring an insurgency, supporting Iranian minority and opposition groups. But when you read this paper, they admit that the groups they're talking about are U.S. listed terrorist organizations that would have to be delisted for the U.S. to more openly back them, which is an admission that they're already covertly backed by the U.S. despite being terrorist organizations. That sound familiar? It sounds exactly like what the U.S. has done with Al-Qaeda in Syria. They also talk about a coup, supporting a military move against the Iranian government, but this is something that they had been doing versus the Syrian government from 2011 all the way up until the government collapsed this month, mid this month, December 2024. So this is what Which Path to Persia said in 2009. Israel may be more willing to bear the risks of Iranian retaliation and international opprobrium than the United States is, but it is not invulnerable and may request certain commitments from the U.S. before it is ready to strike. So they're talking about the U.S. making a deal with Israel to give them the best possible circumstances to carry out a strike on Iran on behalf of the U.S., and absorb all of the condemnation and retaliation. They would have things they would ask the U.S. for. The U.S. could provide this to Israel to make the conditions better for Israel from their point of view. So it says, for instance, the Israelis may want to hold off until they have a peace deal with Syria in hand, assuming that Jerusalem believes that one is within reach, which would help them mitigate blowback from Hezbollah and potentially Hamas. Consequently, they may want Washington to push hard in mediating between Jerusalem and Damascus. This was back in 2009. They probably tried to do that. We remember the United States did actually approach President Bashar al-Assad. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry at the time sat down and had dinner with President Assad, and they almost certainly tried to mediate some sort of peace deal, offer them something to separate themselves from Iran, to isolate Iran so that this could all happen. And of course, Syria said no. So when Syria said no, they didn't just say, well, I guess there's nothing else we can do. They went ahead with all of these hard options for regime change that they were already preparing anyway since 2007, as Seymour Hersh revealed in his articles. They had all of this lined up and ready. They thought it would be easier if Syria did it willingly, but if they didn't, they had the other options already in the works. And so by 2011, that's when they decided to overthrow the Syrian government. Of course, it took a lot longer than they wanted. It took until 2024. But now that this is done, they're going to now move on toward Iran itself. That was always the plan. That was the plan under Bush Jr. It was the plan all throughout the Obama administration, all during the Trump administration. Trump, at every step along the way, contributed toward this singular objective. He played a role in sabotaging and abandoning the Iran deal that was signed under Obama, which again is included in this 2009 document. They said, make a deal with Iran, make everyone in the world believe that the U.S. chose diplomacy and Iran chose war. And that is exactly what both the Obama and Trump administration did in cooperation. It was handed off to the Trump administration. The Trump administration played their role. It is all theater. It was all written down in this plan as of 2009, and then it was implemented by every single presidential administration without exception. And now that Trump is coming back in office, all of the circumstances have been created for the next step, which is attacking Iran itself. And President-elect Donald Trump has surrounded himself with war hawks, including viciously anti-Iran war hawks. Continuing, obviously, Israel's recent war on Hezbollah and U.S.-sponsored regime change in Syria has fulfilled this prerequisite. Regime change achieved in Syria using many of the other methods listed in the 2009 Brookings paper focused on Iran, including supporting a popular uprising, supporting armed minority and opposition groups, airstrikes, and invasion. In fact, such methods are used over and over again against all nations targeted by the U.S. for coercion and eventually regime change. Now let's let's connect this to China. It doesn't really seem like we're going in that direction, but it does ultimately go toward the direction of China. In addition to targeting Iranian-backed militias, Iranian-friendly governments, and Iran itself, the U.S. has utilized terrorist organizations now in Syria against other adversaries abroad, including China. Many signs now indicate the U.S. could redirect these terrorist organizations back toward China once again. This includes the so-called Turkestan Islamic Party, also known as the East Turkestan Islamic Movement, or ETIM. What is particularly troubling about TIP-ETIM is the fact that the U.S. disingenuously removed it from its foreign terrorist organizations list in 2020. So let's look at that. This is an article from DW, German media from 2020. U.S. removes China-condemned group from terror list. China regularly points to the East Turkestan Islamic Movement to justify its crackdown in Muslim minority Xinjiang. The U.S. removed it from the terror list, saying there's no credible evidence that it still exists, except just 2 years before that, the U.S. actually was bombing ethnic Uyghur terrorists in Afghanistan who were ETIM members. So the U.S. said they hadn't seen any evidence that ETIM has existed for the past decade, right here, for more than a decade. And yet just 2 years before they delisted them, they were literally bombing them in Afghanistan. So they just completely lied, and they just hope no one in the public double checks any of this. And they know the Western media won't. So what is particularly troubling about TIP-ETIM is the fact that the U.S. disingenuously removed it from its foreign terrorist organization list in 2020, specifically to provide it with wider and more overt support. So the DW article that I just showed you, titled U.S. Removes China-Condemned Group from Terror List, would claim TIP-ETIM was removed from a terrorist organization as a terrorist organization by the U.S. government because for more than a decade, there has been no credible evidence that ETIM continues to exist. This is demonstrably untrue, considering the U.S. Department of Defense admitted to having carried out airstrikes against the group in Afghanistan only 2 years prior to its delisting. NBC News would report. I just showed you both of those articles. Now, the organization the U.S. government claims no longer exists is in Syria and reported to comprise an entire military unit alongside Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, aiding in the recent overthrow of the Syrian government. HTS is listed still, as I record this, by the U.S. as a foreign terrorist organization right here. This is the foreign terrorist organizations list. U.S. State Department. I'm recording this on December 22nd, 2024. And if you come down here, you will see Al-Nusra Front, aka Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. They were added in 2014, and they are still on the list. IM was never removed by the UN as a terrorist list. It is under this entry on the United Nations official website, talking all about the separatist movement in wants to carve out Xinjiang in China, and they are linked directly with Al-Qaeda. And they never said that they don't exist anymore. And all the evidence, including evidence provided by the U.S. Department of Defense, says that they have existed. There was no reason to delist them except the U.S. wanted to arm and back them. I also want to point out that the British government still lists TIP-ETIM as a designated terrorist organization. Right here, Turkestan Islamic Party, also known as the East Turkestan Islamic Party or the East Turkestan Islamic Movement. So it is still listed as a terrorist organization by the British government. So the U.S., again, the U.S. delisted ETIM, TIP-ETIM, because they wanted to more openly arm and back them. And they did not want China to be able to cite a real legitimate terrorist threat while it was conducting anti-terror policies in Xinjiang. They wanted to depict China as doing this simply to brutalize its own population, which which is not true, but I will get to that in just a moment. The London Telegraph, in a December 13th, 2024 article titled "Uyghur Fighters in Syria Vow to Come for China Next," claims a Uyghur militant group that helped to topple Bashar al-Assad has vowed to take the fight to China. That is this article here. Its main mission to liberate the Muslims of East Turkestan. There is no such thing as East Turkestan. They're talking about Xinjiang, which is internationally recognized as Chinese territory. And they're claiming that China is occupying it. But keep this in mind. These terrorists listed by the UN and the British government as terrorists are calling Xinjiang East Turkestan, and they're claiming it's occupied by China. Keep that in mind. That's going to be important later. A U.S.-backed terrorist organization, fresh from overthrowing a U.S.-targeted nation in the Middle East, now vows to target China next. The ability to do so is only possible with continued U.S. government backing, including training, weapons, and logistics via regional proxies, including Turkey, who prepared and incorporated the militants in the invasion force that toppled Syria's government just this month. Again, December 2024. Short of fighting in China itself, the Telegraph in an accompanying video, so they also made a video about this right here, and they have some additional talking points that they add in this video.
For TIP, fighting alongside others in Syria was just the first step, and China, the final retribution.
They want these terrorists to attack China.
Basharning yallanmalari qanday qashqan bo'lsa Allohning izni bilan, Allohning qudrati bilan, Alloh subhanahu va taolo jabaruti bilan biiznillah bizning Urumchida, Aqsuda, Qashqarda oldimizda Xitoy kafirlar shu Qashqarda o'xshash qochadi biiznillah azza va jalla.
Can TIP take the fight to China, home to the world's largest military with 2 million active troops? It's easier said than done. Still, TIP could target Chinese projects or embassies abroad.
So short of fighting in China itself, the Telegraph and the accompanying video would note, can TIP take the fight to China, home of the world's largest military with 2 million active troops? It's easier said than done. Still, TIP could target Chinese projects or embassies abroad. And that is exactly the plan. The US is going to use these terrorists to attack Chinese embassies and projects abroad alongside all of the other terrorists and extremists the US is already using to do this and has been using to do this for years and years. I want to point out this article from all the way back in 2011. It's titled "Free Baluchistan in the National Interest." And it's all about how China and Pakistan are working together. China's building its Belt and Road Initiative through Pakistan. Pakistan is offering Gwadar Port in Baluchistan, southwest Pakistan. And so this is the conclusion of this article. So an independent Baluchistan would serve U.S. strategic interests in addition to the immediate goal of countering Islamic forces. The Baluch separatists are extremists and are terrorists. And so this is arguing to use them to somehow fight terrorism. But then they slip up at the end and they admit, actually, this is all about stopping the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, the economic corridor going through Pakistan, of course, attacking Gwadar Port itself. And if you read the news every couple of months, you will see deadly attacks carried out in Pakistan against Chinese engineers, Pakistani security forces trying to protect them, and attacks on the infrastructure themselves. There was even an attempt to kill the Chinese ambassador to Pakistan. Again, this was carried out by US-backed Baluchi separatists. Pakistan hotel bomb, deadly blast hits luxury venue. Notice how in the headline, this is April 2021, notice in the headline, they never talk about the fact that the Chinese ambassador was the target. He was staying at this hotel at the time. Luckily, he wasn't actually at the hotel when the bombing took place. You notice how the BBC didn't even add that in the headline. If it was a British ambassador, that would have been the headline. So you can see the game the collective West is playing. They are using terrorists, and they are downplaying the fact that they are using terrorists to basically wage a proxy war against not just Syria, not just Russia and Ukraine, but also against China across Eurasia. And now with ETIM, TIP, ETIM, they're going to expand this proxy war against China, where they're already killing Chinese citizens and they have attempted to kill Chinese ambassadors. This is what the United States is doing right now. This is what China is reacting to. It should be pointed out as well. So the US already backs violent terrorism, attacking Chinese projects and embassies abroad, including in Baluchistan. So I showed you this initial article from 2011, and then from 2011 onward, you will find almost every year attacks by these separatists. This article called for the U.S. to support, so the U.S. obviously has been supporting them since, and they've been carrying out these attacks to advance U.S. geopolitical objectives vis-a-vis China. Now, what about Myanmar? I also mentioned in Myanmar. Here is an article from 2022. Chinese pipeline in Myanmar damaged and attacked by anti-regime forces. Chinese facilities and enterprises are increasingly being caught in the crossfire of the struggle between the PDFs and the Tatmadaw. There are also articles about US-backed opposition groups attacking Chinese infrastructure in Myanmar as recently as 2023 and also this year. And I want to point out that both Myanmar Now and the Irrawaddy are both funded by the US government through the National Endowment for Democracy. If you go to my channel and along the top bar here, you type in Myanmar, you will see that I have done many videos over many years laying out documented evidence of the US involvement in Myanmar behind the armed militants, extremists, terrorists, trying to overthrow the Myanmar government and military and install a pro-US anti-China regime right on the border with China. So again, the exact same thing the US was doing in Ukraine vis-a-vis Russia, they're doing in Myanmar vis-a-vis China. And these militants and these terrorists have been attacking Belt and Road Initiative projects in Myanmar. So again, I'm just trying to point out that this is already ongoing. The use of these terrorists used in Syria to now target Chinese projects and embassies across Eurasia, this is to expand an already ongoing proxy war the U.S. is waging against China. An army of well-trained, well-armed, experienced terrorists fresh from the battlefield in Syria are poised to significantly escalate what is already a U.S. war on China by proxy along the length of Beijing's Belt and Road Initiative and ultimately aimed at China itself. It should be noted that TIP-ETIM and affiliated extremists carried out years of deadly terrorism within China's western region of Xinjiang. The BBC, in a 2014 article titled "Why is There Tension Between China and the Uyghurs?" proudly listed the rampant violence Beijing at the time struggled to contain. That is this article right here. And not to deliberately make this video longer, but there's a point in this article where paragraph after paragraph, it lists these horrible terrorist attacks carried out by these extremists. Starting here, China has been accused of intensifying its crackdown on the Uyghurs after street protests in the 1990s and again in the run-up to the Beijing Olympics in 2008. We know the U.S. Backs chaos in countries it doesn't like when they're hosting the Olympics. But things really escalated in 2009 with large-scale ethnic rioting in the regional capital, Urumqi. Some 200 people were killed in the unrest, most of them Han Chinese, according to officials. And the BBC is going to say, according to officials, and put terrorism and extremists and violence in quotation marks. But there's video footage of all of these attacks, all of these incidents that the BBC mentions. There is video evidence of, and it's horrific footage. Please do not try to track it down and watch it. If you are sensitive to that, you will never be able to unsee it. Let's continue. Security was increased and many Uyghurs detained as suspects, but violence rumbled on as rights groups increasingly pointed to tight control by Beijing. So again, the BBC is trying to frame this as China being repressive and the Uyghur freedom fighters fighting back. In June 2012, 6 Uyghurs reportedly tried to hijack a plane from Hotin to Urumqi before they were overpowered by passengers and crew. So that doesn't sound like freedom fighting. That sounds like terrorism. There was bloodshed in April 2013. And in June that year, 27 people died in Shanshan County after police opened fire on what state media described as a mob armed with knives attacking local government buildings. And again, There's security footage of these extremists with basically machetes chopping up innocent people in front of their family members over and over again in markets, at train stations. There is footage of this that you can see where they are carrying out these horrific terrorist attacks. So again, the BBC saw this footage. They know what really happened, and this is how they're describing it to their readers, who they are confident will never look into any of this on their own. Establishing facts about these incidents is difficult. No, it's not, because there is literal video footage of all of it, because foreign journalists' access to the region is tightly controlled. But in recent months, there appears to have been a shift toward larger scale incidents where citizens have become the target, particularly in Xinjiang. So this is the BBC trying to create doubt in your mind, but also at the same time admitting that irrefutably, this is terrorism targeting civilians. At least 31 people were killed and more than 90 suffered injuries in May 2014 when 2 cars crashed through an Urumqi market and explosives were tossed into the crowd. China called it, in quotation marks, violent terrorist incident. And there, again, there is literal video footage of these maniacs mowing people down with their vehicles in a market and throwing bombs out the window, blowing people up. There is footage of this. And the BBC puts in quotation marks, violent terrorist incident. And just to give you an idea of just how shamelessly dishonest the BBC has always been and still is to this day. It followed a bomb and knife attack at Urumqi's South Railway Station in April, which killed 3 and injured 79 others. In July, authorities said and government offices in Yarkand, I think they need to hire better editors, leaving 96 dead. The imam of China's largest mosque, Jum Tahir, was stabbed to death days later. So this wasn't just targeting Han Chinese, this was targeting Uyghurs as well. In September, about 50 died in blasts in Luntai County outside police stations, a market, and a shop. So a market and a shop, these are civilian targets. Details of both incidents are unclear, and activists had contested some accounts of incidents in state media. Let's continue. I'm telling you, there is a lot of violence carried out by these terrorists backed by the U.S. They have always been backed by the U.S. They are still backed by the U.S. And now they are basically a standing army in Syria waiting to be unleashed. Some violence has also spilled out of Xinjiang. A March stabbing spree in Kunming in Yunnan province that killed 29 people was blamed on Xinjiang separatists, as was an October 2013 incident where a car plowed through a crowd and burst into flames in Beijing's Tiananmen Square. And so then they talk about the crackdown, the security crackdown. There's obvious terrorism taking place. And so there's going to obviously be a crackdown by Beijing's police and government, naturally. And they talk about activists questioning all of this. We'll get into who the activists are in just a moment. I don't think you'll be surprised when you find out who they are. So the BBC in its article, Why is there tension between China and the Uyghurs, proudly listed the rampant violence Beijing at the time struggled to contain. So we just talked about that. When Chinese anti-terrorism efforts finally began to work, the BBC, along with the rest of the Western media, omitted any mention of separatist violence and depicted Chinese efforts to uproot extremism as human rights abuses, coerced labor, and even genocide. So now when you go and check, you just saw me read from the BBC article itself, you go and look at articles from the Western media talking about Xinjiang today, this year, or last year, and see if they mentioned these horrible terrorist incidents. They were proud to report on it in 2014 because China could not control it. But now that they can control it, the West doesn't even mention it. And they just pretend that China cracked down for no reason at all. Again, this is how systematically dishonest the Western media is and how coordinated it is between the BBC, other British media outlets, and American media outlets. No evidence exists of any systematic abuses, including either coerced labor or genocide. Even U.S. government-funded organizations tasked with producing reports claiming to document such abuses bury admissions of a lack of evidence in the reports themselves. So we have this report that I have done a video on, and I'll put the link to this in the video description below. This is from 2020. Coercive labor in Xinjiang, labor transfer and mobilization of ethnic minorities to pick cotton. And I have read this whole report several times in its entirety. And I am telling you, there's literally no evidence at all in here. The author, Adrian Zenz, is part of the US government created and funded Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation. And that is his job. His job is to he is funded by the US government to write reports the US government can cite to justify placing sanctions on China and condemning China for reacting to terrorism the US itself is sponsoring. So if we go to this report and we go to the conclusion all the way at the end, it says, this is what it says in the conclusion. However, in a system where the transition between securitization and poverty alleviation is seamless, because they admit that a lot of this has to do with poverty alleviation. This is how you stop terrorism, is you eliminate poverty, which breeds violence and makes extremism possible. And where the threat of extra-legal internment looms large, it is impossible to define where coercion ends and where local consent may begin. So if you actually documented real coercive labor in this report, which again is like over 20 pages long, that would define where it begins and where it ends. In the entire report, he is unable to find any evidence at all of coercive labor. And so that is his own conclusion to this report that the US government itself cites when placing sanctions on Chinese companies for using Uyghur labor, claiming that it's coercive. They use a report that admits in its own conclusion that there is no real evidence and it's impossible to tell where consent begins and or where consent ends and coercion begins, because they can't document any actual coercive labor. One 2020 report titled Coercive Labor in Xinjiang, Labor Transfer and the Mobilization of Ethnic Minorities to Pick Cotton, written by Adrian Zenz, a member of the US government-funded Victims of Communism Memorial Fund, admitted in its conclusion, again, I repeat this part that I showed you in the report itself, in a system where the transition between securitization and poverty alleviation is seamless and where the threat of extra-legal internment looms large, it is impossible to define where coercion ends and where local consent may begin, which is an admission that there is no evidence of coercive labor. Far from an exception, virtually all reports on the subject stem from either Adrian Zenz himself or reports published by US government-funded organizations, including the Australian Strategic Policy Institute or US NED-funded fronts like the World Uyghur Congress, Uyghur Human Rights Project, Campaign for Uyghurs, and the Uyghur Transitional Justice Database Project. And there's many, many, many more. Here is the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. This is their funding. Again, the link to all of this will be in the video description below. It's an Australian think tank. It's funded by the Australian government, but it's also funded by the British government and, of course, the US Department of State. And regarding these NED-funded organizations, this is the official NED website. Uyghur Human Rights Policy Act builds on work of NED grantees. So every group that they list here is an NED-funded organization. It is funded by the US government and often based in Washington, D.C. or in Europe. It is not based in Xinjiang, China. And so they list at least 4 of these organizations. Remember when I said I would bring this up again, where the TIP, ETIM claim that Xinjiang is actually East Turkestan and it's occupied by China. Remember I said I would bring that up again. Well, this is the World Uyghur Congress funded by the US government. It would not exist without US government funding. And if you go to their About webpage and you come down here, it very clearly repeats that same claim. It talks about opposition movement against Chinese occupation of East Turkestan. They claim that it's a peaceful opposition, but it is the exact same objective of ETIM. It is claiming that Xinjiang is actually East Turkestan, which does not exist, and they're claiming that it is occupied by China, even though no one in the world officially claims that. Not even the United States claims that. Xinjiang is internationally recognized as Xinjiang and as Chinese territory. So this is a US government-funded organization. Right here, they're listed on the NED's official website. And they are promoting separatism in a sovereign nation, China. The US government is funding an organization pursuing separatism in another sovereign nation, China. So it's all very important to understand this. This is what the US is really doing when you hear them talk about Xinjiang, Uyghurs, and genocide. While these organizations pose as human rights advocates, their websites overtly refer to China's Xinjiang region as East Turkestan, as I just showed you, claiming it is occupied by China and openly seeking separatism from China as one of their central objectives underwritten by generous funding by the US government. In other words, the US is backing deadly violence, political movements promoting separatism, and fronts attempting to depict Chinese government's reaction to all of the above as human rights abuses, which in turn is used to justify otherwise indefensible sanctions applied to Chinese companies attempting to do business anywhere the collective West exerts influence. So there is this Voice of America article, VOA being US government funded media, US sanctions target China over allegations of forced labor in Xinjiang. Who are they citing? Who are they citing as the source? Adrian Zenz, who admitted in his report that he has no evidence of coercive labor. That is who the US government is citing to place sanctions on China. So again, the sanctions are completely indefensible. They're being placed on China arbitrarily, and the US is citing fabricated lies put out by someone they themselves are funding to write reports. So let's continue. Let's finish this article. While many are tempted to treat conflicts around the globe in isolation, the truth is the United States is pursuing a long-standing global policy of eliminating all rivals. This goes back to this 1992 article I always reference. U.S. strategy plan calls for ensuring no rivals develop. This was official U.S. Department of Defense policy, and this was implemented from then all the way up until now, and it will continue to be implemented regardless of who is in the White House and regardless of who controls Congress. The U.S. will do this through persuasion, coercion, sanctions, U.S.-sponsored sedition, terrorism, and military confrontation by proxy and directly. The fall of Syria and other nations like it contribute toward a more dangerous world where larger and more stable nations may be targeted, undermined, and toppled next, like Iran, like Russia, eventually like China. They would like to finally destabilize, divide, and destroy China, so that no rivals exist for the United States. The chaos that has followed U.S. regime change in Serbia, Afghanistan, Iraq, Georgia, Libya, Ukraine, and now Syria, this 21st century is just a small fraction of the instability, death, destruction, and destitution the entire globe faces should Washington continue prevailing in its geopolitical pursuits, because the collapse of Syria is the U.S. prevailing in its geopolitical pursuits. That's what they wanted to happen. That is what now has happened. Among the most effective and so far unanswered weapons the United States government wields is its dominion over global information space and its global spanning network of political interference and political capture, centered around the National Endowment for Democracy and adjacent government and corporate funded foundations like Open Society and the Omidyar network. Russian and Chinese military and economic power continues to rise, and both nations have successfully protected their respective information spaces. However, the U.S. continues unopposed, undermining nations along both Russia and China's peripheries, successfully politically capturing nations and transforming them into political and even military battering rams against both targeted nations. While China may have successfully uprooted U.S.-sponsored extremism in Xinjiang, the U.S. continues arming, backing, and promoting these same extremists out of China's reach in recently decimated Syria. Through Washington's control over information space outside of China, these terrorists are being presented as freedom fighters in much the same way the U.S. has presented HTS, despite being listed by the U.S. State Department as actual literal terrorists. Russia and China aid partner nations in the defense of their traditional national security domains, air, land, and sea, but have failed to export their own domestic success in securing a 21st century national security domain, information space. Should Russia and China succeed in doing this, Washington will be denied one of its last and most effective weapons used to sustain its global hegemony, making multipolarism inevitable rather than a mere possibility. And what I'm talking about is the fact that I just showed you all of the evidence that all of these claims about Uyghur genocide in China are lies. And even the reports the US government funds people to write admit that there is no evidence of any of this. That China was reacting to very real terrorism, the BBC proudly reported on back in 2014 and now omits from all of their articles today. And they get away with it because they dominate information space outside of Russia and China. Here in Thailand, in Southeast Asia, a very close ally of China, China being its largest, most important trade partner, working together with Thailand to build infrastructure projects here in Thailand, a high-speed rail network, for example. The media here is still utterly dominated by the West. Even Thai language media here is just copying and pasting what Western media is reporting. The universities have been infiltrated. The professors are all products of US exchange and scholarship programs, and then they just teach generation after generation to think and act and pursue Western interests at the expense of Thailand's own best interests. And you will see people wringing their hands and complaining that Thailand is too close to China and that they should have a closer relationship with the United States on the other side of the planet, which objectively makes no sense, but it is a product of Thailand being unable to secure its information space. China creates a more compelling argument objectively, but objective reality and the fantasies the West sells, and because the West dominates information space, always sells much better. This is a huge problem, and this means that no matter how strong Russia and China and other nations in the multipolar world are militarily or industrially or economically, no matter how good their actual selling points are, until they do something about the West's control over global information space, the rest of the world will never know. And that is the sad reality we live in. This is what has cost Syria. This is what costs Russia and China better relationships with other nations, even right now across the rest of the world, including right here in Southeast Asia where I am. So I hope this article has helped expand your understanding of the connection between, say, Syria, Ukraine, Iran, and eventually China, how the US is fighting a global war, how the US uses the same tricks and lies when it's targeting any one of these nations, and why these nations have so far been ineffective fighting back because of information space and the necessity for, say, Russia or China to help a nation like Thailand set up their own social media networks so they don't depend on US-based social media networks that determine how information is shared here in Thailand among Thai people. Develop an international social media platform that people like me can use to spread my analysis to people around the world so I don't have to depend on US-based platforms like YouTube or even X. And despite X improving since being bought and transformed from Twitter to X, it's still run by a man who works in the US government. Elon Musk is in the incoming cabinet of US President Donald Trump. So these are things that have to be worked on and resolved. This is something that I am going to continuously talk about in addition to all the conflicts taking place and the details amid them. If you thought this video was useful, please like and share. Think about subscribing. It's free to do. It helps the channel grow. Check out the video description below for other
friends in a war of attrition like the one we can see in Ukraine, manpower is key. And it seems Russia is getting the upper hand, but this time without having to resort to mobilization. All the new soldiers are volunteers. Here from the Defense Post, Russian army's tempting offers paying off as recruitment surges sixfold. Or here, Putin says Russia recruited more than 430,000 to army this year. Russia's recruiting 25,000 to 30,000 new soldiers a month. For the Emperor! Hurrah! How exactly did Russia manage to grow such a massive army within only a year? How did Russia convince so many men to join the war? The strategy was simple. Get rich while serving your country. All across Russia, from rural areas to busy city centers, there are these massive billboards displaying army recruitment ads lined up one after the other. Even in the most remote areas of Siberia, you will find such leaflets with the bonus payments you will receive as a soldier. And that's without even taking into account the numerous recruitment commercials that were posted online.
Из чего же сделаны наши мужчины?
To drive the numbers up and meet the demands of troops at the front, Russian oblasts are put in a position where they're competing with one another to attract the most recruits. Here you can see the recruitment page for St. Petersburg. On the left, appeal to patriotism, do like your ancestors during World War II. And then on the right, salary for the first year, with lots and lots of zeros. And if you enlist in Moscow, you can get even more money.
With full pensions from our treasury. Respected, rich, loved. You'll be treated by your wives and children as heroes for the rest of your lives.
Now, spoilers, one of the brilliant parts of this plan is how paying more money to soldiers allowed to completely bypass the corruption that is plaguing Russian society. So in this video, we will analyze how this unique recruitment campaign works, why it brought very high results, but also how it completely bypassed the need for a new mobilization, at least for now. If you're wondering how I keep up with all the political news related to the Ukraine war, it's because I used this app and website by Ground News for my research. I found this interesting story. Zelensky opened to West cutting through butter. The reason is simple. There were barely any Russian riflemen manning the front, since many of the kontraktniki returned home after the end of their contract, which expired around July and August 2022. Meanwhile, Bars battalions of volunteers and the militias from Luhansk and Donetsk were simply not enough to stop the Ukrainian advance. With the looming military debacle, on the 21st of September 2022, Putin announced the start of a partial mobilization in Russia. 300,000 reservists were to be called under the flag. Some already had combat experience, but many didn't. From a military perspective, the partial mobilization was a turning point, as it stopped the Ukrainian offensive and helped Russian forces stabilize the front line. The Russian Ministry of Defense also changed the terms and conditions. This time around, no fixed-term contracts, and mobilized personnel would have to serve until the end of the war. The problem was its negative effects on Russian society. Many men feared to be part of the next batch to be mobilized and sent to the front. In turn, hundreds of thousands left Russia and fled through bordering countries. Apart from mobilization, Russia could have called up some of its conscripts. As you know, every year 400,000 Russians go through military service for 12 months. The problem is this solution is once again highly unpopular in Russia. Most of the conscripts are very young, 18, 19-year-olds, and the Russian population don't want to repeat the same story as what happened during the Chechen wars, where poorly trained teenagers were literally sent to war. So if mobilization is off the table, conscripts is off the table, what solution remains? Meanwhile, in the first months of 2022, the recruitment and the arrival of Bars battalions of volunteers proved to be extremely disorganized. The Russian Ministry of Defense had to think of a sustainable way to replenish its ranks. That's when Yevgeny Prigozhin and PMC Wagner rose to fame. They had the creative idea of recruiting inside prisons to swell their ranks. Wagner came up with a new system, offering a salary of 100,000 rubles a month, plus a special enlistment bonus. Inmates would be pardoned after the completion of a 6-month contract. The recruitment campaign was very successful, even a bit too successful in the eyes of the MOD, but that's another story. A couple months later, the Russian Ministry of Defense followed a similar model. Here, the Moscow Times wrote, "The Kremlin is increasingly turning to creative measures to boost its troops, without formally declaring another unpopular mobilization. If glory, patriotism, and medals can't get the job done, maybe financial incentives, good old cash, would attract more people into recruitment offices. And it worked. Money is the decisive factor, as both one-time enlistment rewards and wages offered by the Defense Ministry far exceed the median salaries in the regions. In the first 3 months of 2024, 100,000 Russians enlisted into the armed forces. That means over 30,000 a month. In this graph by pro-Ukrainian media agency United 24, you can see how the number of Russian soldiers in Ukraine slowly increased to 330,000 in early 2023 to 370,000 by the end of the year. But then it skyrocketed in 2024, all the way up to 470,000 troops, and then again to 520,000 by the summer of 2024. According to Ukrainian Commander-in-Chief Syrskyi, by the end of the year, the number of Russian soldiers in Ukraine could reach 690,000. That means 430,000 contracts were signed in 2024 alone. That's the size of the entire active duty component of the US Army. And now we understand how, from an operational perspective, the Russian military has launched much more offensives throughout 2024 than it did in 2023. It's simply because they have more troops available. So how exactly did Russia do it?
The Emperor protects.
Here's one of the many recruitment websites for the Russian armed forces with a bunch of information. Contract service, a worthy choice for a patriot. High monetary satisfaction, solving the housing crisis, a secure future for the family, right for pension after 20 years. In this one it says, become a defender of the fatherland with lots of zeros on the salary. The total amount of money a recruit gets by signing a contract with the armed forces consists of 4 things: a monthly salary, special allowances, a one-time enlistment bonus, and extra money from a bounty system. Literally like in a video game, you get points depending on your performance on the battlefield, but we'll get to that later in the video. Let's start with the monthly salary. For anyone that signs a contract for a duration of at least 1 year, the Russian army promises a minimum guaranteed monthly salary of around 200,000 rubles, or just under 2,000 USD. You have to remember that the minimum wage in Russia is about 160 USD a month, and many people in rural areas earn about $300 per month, which is just enough for them to get by. In Russia, $800 a month is considered to be a very good salary. Now check this out. The Russian army guarantees a minimum salary of $2,000 a month. That's essentially 6 times more money than a guy can expect working a difficult job outside manual labor somewhere in Siberia. 6 times more money. It's literally the wages of fear. As you can see here, depending on your position, you can even get a little bit more cash. For example, a rifleman gets 210,000 rubles, a driver 216,000, and as a squad leader, you can expect to make 238,000 rubles. Let's take a look at the map of Russian losses on Mediazona. If we assume the recruitment rate is proportional to the losses, the oblasts with the highest number of recruits are located in the Ural region, like Tatarstan, Bashkortostan, Chelyabinsk, Yekaterinburg, Perm, all this area at the gate of Siberia. But as you can see, there are also a lot of recruits coming from the Far East, as well as from the Caucasus, namely Rostov and Krasnodar Krai, which is the homeland of the Kuban Cossacks. Typically, all these regions I just named are considered to be poorer than the rest of Russia. People living there tend to have lower salaries, less job opportunities, higher unemployment rate, and so on. By all financial standards, these volunteers now make up a rising middle class seeking to use the war as a ladder to prosperity. That means if you are a bashkir with no special skills, serving in the military could change your life forever. It's a one-time opportunity to raise yourself and your family out of poverty. Overall, a Russian soldier can expect the equivalent of 25,000 US dollars a year plus benefits. Think about it, that's the same as an entry-level pay for a US Army soldier. But we have to take into consideration that the cost of living in Russia is much lower in comparison using the same ratio to minimum wage. It's as if a US soldier earned something like $190,000 a year upon signing the contract. Almost 200K. Would you go to war for that amount of money? Not entirely sure, right? Well, it's the same in Russia. So that's why the Russian government also offers a panoply of allowances for volunteers, family support programs, free education for children, reduced fares for public transportation, housing benefits, subsidized water and electricity, special allowance for hookers. Oh, no, I'm told not the hookers, okay. Full access to military medical facilities for both soldiers and their family. Extra money for the soldiers with pregnant wives. Possibility of receiving a free plot of land. Those are really interesting benefits, especially for men that have families to take care of. But what about all the others? That's why the Russian Ministry of Defense also offers a one-time enlistment bonus. Since Putin's decree in July 2024, each volunteer gets 400,000 rubles from the federal budget, up from 195,000 rubles by the previous decree from November 2022. The order to transfer this one-time cash payment is issued within 10 days after the commander of the military unit submits the corresponding report. Now, there were cases where people just signed the contracts in order to just take the money and disappear. But then let's just say they get actively chased by the FSB. Oh, by the way, if someone actually wants quick cash, there is even a refer a friend program. For example, in Tatarstan, if you don't want to go to war but you want to help the country and you're a good salesman, you can also get rich. If you bring your friend to a recruitment office and that friend ends up signing a contract, you get 100,000 rubles. That's almost $1,000. 3 months of salary for a guy in Siberia. Now, on top of a monthly salary, special allowances, and the 400,000 rubles bonus from the federal budget, recruits can get yet another bonus, this time from the region they were recruited from. What ended up happening is that throughout 2024, Russia's federal districts have been competing with one another to offer the most generous amount in order to fill their quotas. For example, Krasnoyarsk, Perm, Ulyanovsk, and Irkutsk each offered an upfront payment of 400,000 rubles. That means even some of the poorest regions in Russia now equaled the 400,000 ruble federal contribution. This means every new Russian recruit gets at least 800,000 rubles upon signing a contract, or 7,800 USD. And it's not a surprise that all the oblasts I just named are around the Ural region, meaning the recruitment rate in those regions is very high and they don't need to increase the bonus. However, it seems some Russian federal districts were lagging behind. On July 29th, the Kaluga region increased payments from 100 to 495,000 rubles. Bashkortostan, 500,000 rubles as well. Lipetsk, Tula, and Smolensk regions offer 600,000 rubles. Chelyabinsk Oblast offers a 700,000 ruble bonus. Not bad at all. Could be interesting for Russian YouTubers that fled abroad, struggle to get views, and that are now stuck in Portugal. Rostov Oblast, 1.2 million rubles bonus. And I'm not done, it keeps going up. In the large urban centers, obviously you need more financial incentives to attract volunteers. That's why St. Petersburg pays recruits an extra 1.7 million rubles. In the capital region of Moscow, where most of the wealth of the country is concentrated, the sign-up bonus reached 1.9 million rubles. Listen up, that's 35 times the median monthly salary, or 3 years of pay up front. And that's not all. Moscow also adds another 50,000 rubles per month as salary supplement. So someone from Moscow can expect over 5 million rubles after 1 year of war, or nearly 50,000 US dollars. That's what the average worker in Moscow would earn in 7 years. Overall, this is the top 5. We went over Moscow, St. Petersburg, but then check this out. Second position, Nizhny Novgorod, and number 1, Belgorod Oblast, where Governor Gladkov increased the one-time enlistment bonus from 800,000 rubles to 2.6 million, 25 $100,000 in bonus. It's important to mention that Russian oblasts seem to be under pressure to reach certain quotas by the 31st of December. Otherwise, on the 11th of November, the Moscow Times explained how the supply of personnel for the war has become something of a key performance indicator for Russian governors. Here, Belgorod Oblast seemed to be in trouble. Not only is the enlistment bonus super high, but they even said that they're ready to pay your ticket from anywhere in Russia for you to sign in Belgorod. Overall, what I could see, the typical profile of a volunteer is the following. A man in his 30s or 40s that is living on the margin of society. He can't really fit in. He has no stable job, no stable income, most likely has problems with the Justice Department, probably some debts. Typically, these men have little achievements to be proud of in the civilian world. Signing a contract would allow them to prove themselves to their family and to Russian society, all the while going on some sort of adventure and the thrills of the unknown. Overall, that's how the Russian army grew so massive without having to resort to another mobilization or the call-up of conscripts. Additionally, these financial incentives could explain why the Russian armed forces are facing relatively few desertions. According to Bloomberg, only 10,000 cases could be reported, 10 times less than in the Ukrainian army. Goes to show you can buy loyalty, as long as you don't miss a payment.
Lannister always pays his debts.
A side product of this system is that it completely bypasses corruption. You see, instead of having people bribe various government officials to avoid being drafted, and thus increase the corruption present in the country, the current Russian system bypasses all these problems by using a financial reward system for those that volunteer for the SMO. Another benefit of increased pay that I noticed is how every Russian army unit can organize its own fundraiser within the ranks. There was this detachment of UAV operators where every fighter donated at least 10,000 rubles per month to the unit to buy various pieces of equipment like drones, and another 5,000 ruble supplement for extra food. A lot of the money is reinvested into the war effort. All these little things seem to definitely increase the morale of Russian military personnel. While scrolling through the recruitment page of Moscow Oblast, I stumbled on this part where authorities offer a bunch of military equipment to new recruits. On top of a rifle, helmet, flak jacket, Moscow Oblast offers gloves, knee pads, waterproof duffel bag, camouflage poncho, and much more. With that being said, every new recruit is strongly encouraged to buy additional protection and gear with their bonus. It's literally their life insurance. However, signing a contract with the Russian Ministry of Defense also comes with a certain risk, such as death.
For the Emperor!
Honestly, I expected that on these recruitment pages, they would only bring up this topic at the very bottom in very small font. But actually, no, they make it pretty obvious and they want every recruit to know what they're going into. For sure, they will use euphemisms, but the information is there. They say that in case of an injury that gets you medically discharged, you receive a lump sum of 3.2 million rubles, plus 3 million in case of a serious injury, plus a monthly compensation for a disability. In the section helping the family, which is a euphemism, 5 million rubles goes to the family of the deceased soldier. Once again, that's about 50,000 US dollars. I understand that no amount of money will ever replace the loss of a loved one, but it's better than nothing. In comparison from what I saw about the US military, the family gets a special tax-free payment of $100,000. Now, of course, this is Russia, and there's always a little trap. All this money is available for people that sign a contract with the military for a minimum duration of 1 year. The other options is 3 and 5 years. Now, it seemed very strange to me that the Russian armed forces would once again offer such fixed-term contracts for a short duration. Not only is it one of the leading causes of their defeat in the fall of 2022, but think about all the problems in regards to retention of military personnel. Think of all these soldiers with combat experience that the Russians would lose every 12 months, only to be replaced with newbies and having to continuously launch these massive recruitment campaigns. I don't know, it feels like such a headache. On top of the rate of attrition, then you have so many soldiers just leaving the ranks at the end of their contract. This seems unsustainable in the long term. Too much manpower would be lost. So I did some digging. There was barely any information online. I talked to some people, and in the end, there are no one-year contracts. It's somewhat of a scam or false advertising. What nobody tells the recruits is that any contract is automatically renewed until the end of the war.
Hey, yo, what the?
Meaning you will not leave the military unless you're 6 feet under or medically discharged. I mean, that was essentially the same policy for the US Army during World War II. And it makes sense. Now, in order for Russian troops to cope better, they do say that soldiers have the right to take leave at any time convenient for them, if approved by their commander. In one of the interviews I saw, the Russian soldiers said that they don't like to take a leave of more than 2 weeks, because if they stay longer in the civilian life, the moment they get back to the front, they're very rusty, and thus this puts their life in danger. But you know what? It's okay, because Russian soldiers now get even more incentives to stay at the front and fight by getting more money thanks to Russia's extremely capitalistic bounty system. Essentially, you get extra payments in cash for special distinctions. Literally like a video game. The Russian military command understood that in the modern age, medals are not enough to motivate the troops to excel in combat. So here are some of the special payments that you can get at the front. A Russian soldier can expect 8,000 rubles for every combat day. Every assault squad receives 50,000 rubles for each kilometer of enemy territory gained. So about 5,000 rubles per stormtrooper. And I'm pretty sure that even the soldiers that fell in combat during this push forward will have the money go to their family. But that's not all. 50,000 rubles for the unit that destroyed an enemy armored vehicle. 100,000 rubles for an enemy tank. Extra points if it's a NATO tank like a Leopard, Abrams, or Challenger. 500,000 rubles. 1 million for capturing one of these NATO tanks. If you do so, you can also enter some sort of lottery system where you could earn an extra prize of up to 5 million rubles. It's literally better than Vegas. 200,000 rubles for the destruction of an enemy helicopter. 300,000 for the destruction of a HIMARS. They literally have an entire pay scale of rewards. I wonder how much for a destroyed American brilliantly. In this article, we'll learn that in the period going from January 1st to the 31st of May 2023, over 3,000 Russian servicemen received payments for feats of arms. So it is really a thing. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think any military in the world has a bounty system similar to the Russians. Nope. Now, what is even more interesting is that this ultra-capitalistic cash reward system dates back from the Soviet army during World War II. For example, for the Hero of the Soviet Union award, that got you an extra 50 rubles. For each destroyed enemy tank, the crew were paid 500 rubles. If an infantryman destroyed a tank, that was 1,000 rubles bonus. Infantry scouts were entitled to a cash reward of 1,000 rubles for every 10 combat missions during the day, or for 5 missions at night. But this bounty system was also available for the Air Force and the Navy. Fighter pilots were paid 1,000 rubles for each enemy aircraft shot down, and 2,000 rubles if it was a bomber. Even mechanics got rewards. For each T-34 that you repaired, that got you an extra 500 rubles. Now, as you can imagine, this sum was symbolic, since there was virtually nothing to buy with money in the USSR. First of all, many never saw any of this money. And those that did sent most of these earnings to their family in form of vouchers. You could get a bar of soap for 50 rubles, or a loaf of bread for 500 rubles. So that means a Soviet fighter pilot shooting down an enemy aircraft was entitled to 2 loaves of bread.
A great success!
Now, Soviet soldiers also had access to mobile shops, where with the few rubles they had, they could purchase anything that could make their lives a little bit better, such as getting a shave or going to the barbershop. or a bottle of vodka that you could share with your tavarich for 800 rubles. All this to say that there is a significant upgrade in this bounty system between World War II and today, where soldiers actually get financial incentives right into their bank account. So, to conclude all this, now the big question is, how sustainable is this entire recruitment program? According to the latest reports, it seems that less volunteers are showing up in recruitment offices. Medusa reported on the 4th of December the influx of volunteers into the Russian army has noticeably decreased, although the payment for signing a contract has doubled. Allegedly, the number of recruits is 600 per day compared to 1,200 earlier this year. If this is true, then it's a serious problem for the Russian armed forces, since frontline divisions need a continuous flow of troops to keep up with the war of attrition. We can think that many men wanted to spend one last New Year's and Christmas with their family and friends before signing up for the war in Ukraine. From now, we see two options. Number one, recruitment goes back up in 2025, and then the Russian Ministry of Defense basically has to continue the same system. Number two, if recruitment continues to go down, the most logical option would be to increase the bonuses once again. But can the Russian treasury sustain this? Additionally, Russia could face diminishing returns by constantly increasing payments, while only marginally getting more people to sign contracts. There's another option that Russian authorities are looking at. As you can see on the recruitment page of St. Petersburg, recruiters are offering to write off up to 10 million rubles in debt, the equivalent of almost 100,000 US dollars. So it will be very interesting how things develop in the coming weeks and months. That's all I have for you today. Let me know in the comment section what you thought of my analysis. If you're new to this channel, make sure
Larry, let's get started with what's going on right now between Israel and let's say I wanted to say Syria, but it's between Israel and Turkey right now. We had a huge rally in Turkey managed by Erdogan's son and against Israel.
One second.
The problem for Israel is that in accomplishing this, they climbed into bed both with Turkey, or Turkey, and with the United States and Great Britain. The relationship with the U.S., not surprising. The relationship with Turkey is more troubling, and it shows that, Israel has a history of, let's call it, marriages of convenience, where they'll enter into relationships for a short-term benefit, but in the long run, it becomes a problem. I've talked about it several times with you. In the early 1980s, Israel had a close relationship with Iran when it was under the control of the Ayatollah Khomeini. They were providing them weapons because their objective was to get rid of and eliminate Iraq. Then once they got rid of Iraq, Saddam Hussein, man, everything would be great. Well, it didn't turn out that way. Now they're claiming that they're locked into an existential struggle with Iran, and they've got to take out Iran at any price. And part of that price was getting rid of Bashar al-Assad. Whatever deal was made between Israel, Netanyahu, and Erdogan, that deal's not going to hold up. Syria is a festering wound, and like any festering wound that's infected, it can create what's called sepsis, and it's an infection of the blood that kills the body. Turkey is best positioned. It has the manpower and the resources and the depth to move into Syria, which it's doing. But in the process, it still doesn't have the control over the various clans and tribes and ethnic groups that comprise Syria. So the Alawites, who are very concentrated in one area, they've been attacked by HTS. The Tahrir al-Sham folks. They're rising up. They're pushing back. They're ambushing. There are fights going on there. Erdogan has been just, insistent that the Kurds must be destroyed. So I guess it's the U.S. backs the Syrian Defense Force, and the Turks back the Syrian National Army, and they're going to clash. At some point here in the next weeks, months, the Turks and the United States are going to be squaring off against each other, and then it's going to create a real problem for NATO. And this leaves Israel in the position of trying to figure out, okay, how we got to control this new territory in southern Syria. With what? It would be one thing if we were seeing that Israel's manpower was increasing, that the size of their population increasing. But it's just the opposite's been happening. They've been losing population. Several inhabitants with the start of the war on October 7th just said, man, we're getting out of here. We're not sticking around for this. So they bailed out. You've had the Israeli army, which is a reserve force, just exhausted because they've been portrayed as the mightiest army in the Middle East. Well, that's like saying that the one-eyed man has the best eyesight in the house of the blind. Okay, it's all relative. And they, with their mighty army, they've been unable to defeat Hamas in the Gaza Strip. And I mean, this is an enclosed area that the Hamas does not have, any secure lines of communication for receiving resupply. Despite that, they've still managed to hold on against all odds. Then Israel's got to go into the West Bank. The tensions there are mounting, and the conflicts and clashes are increasing. Then they've tried to get into southern Lebanon and expel Hezbollah. That failed. They keep saying, we've killed Sinwar. We've killed all the Hezbollah leaders from Nasrallah on down. We're doing great. Okay, then why haven't all these unit groups surrendered? They've given up. Well, they haven't. So now you've got the rhetoric coming out of Turkey, where, I forget what the exact expression was, but it was basically the name of the mosque in Istanbul, followed by the name of another mosque that's in Damascus, and then it's on to Al-Aqsa. The Al-Aqsa Mosque. Al-Aqsa, yeah. And so there is a strong religious element still within the Turkish population that believe, hey, we controlled that area for 600 years. By God, we're going to take it back. So, at some point, I don't know if it'll be this year or next year, but Israel's going to be in a war with Turkey. So Turkey and Israel will be squaring off and fighting each other. And Israel will, I think, come to see Turkey as more of a threat than Iran, because Turkey is better positioned than Iran to provide supplies to fighters. We'll see. This is really sort of a delicate situation. But if you watch the news coming out of Syria, it's getting more chaotic every day, not less. So they're the Al-Qaeda types, the HTS former al-Nusra, former ISIS. These guys are not administrators. Okay, they're artists. They're passionate about their cause, but their ability to actually execute and organize is very limited. So you're going to look at a spread of a civil war that no one group is going to be no one entity or country will be able to control.
I think right now there is a huge burden for Turkey with the situation in Syria, because at the end of the day, Larry, we know the situation in Gaza, in the West Bank is dire. It's unbelievable right now.
Yeah.
There has to be some sort of move on the part of the Muslim countries. These are Turkey, Iran, all the Arab states. Do you think that at the end of the day, the situation in Syria would go to a direction that may bring these countries together, may bring some sort of understanding with the situation in Gaza, in the West Bank, in Palestine, to have some sort of, to put some sort of pressure on maybe the Trump administration, because we know Donald Trump is not interested in these continuous and endless wars, in my opinion. I really do believe that.
Yeah. Well, look.
How they can do that, in your opinion?
Yeah. The part of the problem is the leadership. You don't have. Erdogan is the closest thing to a popular leader in the Muslim world. So he's Turkish, not Arab. Within the Arab countries, if we're talking Jordan, Iraq, well, let's put Iraq to the side. Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Oman, United Arab Emirates. Those are, let's call them rigid elite states. You know, a small group of people, not sheikhs, not democratically elected, maybe through tribal history or whatever, are in control. So they don't even reflect the will, quote, the will of the people. In fact, I think you could make a good case that in most of these countries, they routinely ignore what the majority of the people would like to do. So the same applies to Egypt. That, you know, the long-standing disregard from a humanitarian standpoint of the Palestinian cause. You know, they've been willing to sacrifice it for their own personal interests for the last 50 years, 50, 60 years, for God's sake. So I don't see that changing anytime soon. It is possible, though, that if Erdogan, let's assume that Erdogan succeeds in quashing the Kurds, puts that to bed. That will end that'll, I think, be welcomed by Iran as well. Nobody have to worry about the Kurdish problem anymore. Now, I don't think that'll happen, but let's just assume that could. And that Erdogan ends up consolidating control over the Alawites and the Druze, as well as the various Sunni clans that are running around, which includes the criminal organizations that are still thriving and active with narcotics trafficking, arms trafficking, human trafficking. He gets control of that. Then, at that point, maybe these other, the Saudis and others will say, hey, there's a strong man amongst us. Now, you also can't rule out that they'll be afraid of Erdogan. Yeah, this guy's getting too powerful. We gotta watch him. He could threaten us. But from the standpoint of Israel, they're not going to be secure. And that is Israel's war, all this killing, instead of making it more secure, it's going to make it less secure. And it's going to stretch its resources to the breaking point.
It seems right now they're pushing for a conflict with Iran. Let me play a clip here for you, Larry, on Fox News, talking about the policy of Trump administration toward Iran.
Iranian regime is facing several setbacks this year, with Israel decimating its proxy forces and its nuclear program. It is now weaker and more vulnerable to an attack, and that could present options for the incoming Trump administration how to approach the Iran nuclear threat. Mike Pompeo is a Fox News contributor and former Secretary of State, and we are so lucky to have you this morning. Happy holidays to you. Thanks for joining us. I want to play a quick soundbite for you from Jake Sullivan, National Security Advisor, here on not only Iran's weakened state, but why that might actually be a problem. They might be desperate for nuclear weapons here. Let's unpack it.
If you're Iran right now and you're looking around at the fact that your conventional capability has been reduced, your proxies have been reduced, your main client state has been eliminated, Assad has fallen, it's no wonder there are voices saying, hey, maybe we need to go for a nuclear weapon right now. It's a risk that I'm personally briefing the incoming team on, and it's something that is the consequence, not of Iranian strength, but of Iranian weakness.
Agree with that, Secretary?
Well, first of all, happy holidays to you as well. When we step back from what's taken place over the last now year and change in the Middle East, we can see that America is a lot more at risk. We certainly know that Israel was with the atrocities of October 7th, that so many have seemed to have moved past. The Iranians are weaker. There's no doubt about it. The leadership of Hamas is destroyed. The leadership of Hezbollah is destroyed. No thanks to this administration. President Biden told them to stand down. If they'd done that when they had been told to do so by the Americans, these terrorists would still be alive, killing folks. The Iranian regime will have to be dealt with by President Trump. I'm confident he will go back to a model which tries to get to a better outcome. There's no harm in trying to see if the Iranians have changed their stripes, but they've never negotiated. They've always understood that power was the most important thing, and I think President Trump will see that. We see it in all the things he's saying already from Mar-a-Lago. I'm confident he will deliver a policy with respect to Iran that puts more pressure on the regime, gives the Iranian people an opportunity for freedom and liberty, and protects America in a way that always puts our country first.
Yeah, Mike, that's what a lot of Iranian activists say all the time, that Iran does not respond to diplomacy.
Yeah, Larry, the policy is, as Netanyahu is trying to do, sending video messages to Iranian people to just rise up in Iran and they're attacking from outside. How do you see what he has said, he has suggested?
All of this is based on some false assumptions. But like, any false assumption, if you assume that if you flap your arms fast enough that you can fly and you jump off a 40-story building, you're still going to crash into the ground and die. So, didn't matter how deeply you believe that, how sincerely you believe that nonsense. Well, that's what Mike Pompeo and all these people are doing with respect. Iran's so much weaker now. Okay, so if they're so much weaker, then why did they pose a threat? Oh, no, they're dangerous, so we got to stop them. Oh, so they're not weaker. I mean, which is it? They have been so terribly impaired that, they're barely able to feed themselves and quell the population. Or, yeah, we need to go in there and take out their nuclear program now while we can. And again, all of this is predicated in part on the belief that, boy, we wiped out their air defense system. They don't have anything. Now, then you step back and look and say, okay, what's really going on? Well, in about 3 weeks, Iran and Russia are signing on the 17th of January a strategic initiative. So let's call it an agreement to cooperate both on military, economic, and political fronts. Does that sound like countries getting weaker? They're building up a strong ally. The West, they're ignoring the relationship that Iran also has with China, because China has clear interests with Iran, which is one of the reasons they've been conducting annual military naval exercises with Iran and Russia. So the West has been obsessed with getting rid of Iran. It started with the fall of the Shah, because the United States, along with the United Kingdom, played the instrumental role in getting rid of Mossadegh as president in 1953, I believe. And then the installation of the Shah, and then the abuses that occurred under the Shah of Iran, and a popular uprising. They got rid of the Shah. And then, America's shocked. God, they blame us. When you are the one enabling the person that's doing all of the abuse to abuse you, yeah, you do have a tendency to blame the person that was the enabler. So all of this, propaganda is designed to prepare the American public, the Israeli public, that we're going to attack Iran. If Iran's air defense system is intact, which I believe it is, and their missile force is still quite strong, which I believe it is. So those are the two critical assumptions. If the West is right that Iran has no credible air defense any longer and no ability with missiles to strike back, then yeah, the United States could attack them and, cause some more damage. But if it had no air defense and its missile force was spent, what kind of threat did it represent anyway? Okay. But if my assumptions are correct, then all of a sudden Iran shoots down a bunch of Israeli planes. They don't make it they foolishly try to get into the country and they're shot down. And Israeli pilots are taken prisoner. And then Iran, as threatened in the past, as promised, will launch missile strikes on U.S. military installations in Iraq and in Qatar, Al Udeid Air Force Base. And all of a sudden, the United States is going to be faced with having to dramatically escalate on the conventional side, or even run the risk of a nuclear war using nukes. At that point, Russia's sitting there saying, wait a goddamn minute. No. You don't get to be this out of control bully. This stops now or else. So, yeah, it's, we're heading into some uncharted waters. And unfortunately, I think Trump has surrounded himself with people that are going to encourage the assumption that Iran's weak and we can do whatever we want.
Considering the Trump's first term in Washington and right now, do you think at the end of the day, who's going to be in charge? These people are able to have some sort of leverage on him, or he's going to be the one that decides about going to war or not?
No, I think Trump, at least in terms of how he's prepared for this term in office, by virtue of the appointments he's made, the organization that has been in place, I think he will be calling the shots. And that's the hope, that while, a lot of his bombast and threats are just that, they're negotiating tools that when you really get him down to what it is that he wants or believes, he is not inclined to go to war. I know that even on the decision to kill Soleimani, he came under enormous pressure. The pressure at that time, I think he gave into because he lacked experience, and he was deferring a lot to some people that he assumed knew better. I think he now knows that they don't necessarily know better, and he's got more confidence in his own instincts, given what he survived. But you still can't rule out that he's also emotional. He's not Vladimir Putin. Putin is totally cerebral. Putin, in a way, is sort of like Mr. Spock from Star Trek. He's driven totally by logic and by rational thought. Trump isn't. Trump's a man of emotion, and the emotion can get you into trouble.
They're talking about in Israel, they're talking about decapitating the leaders of Houthis. And in your opinion, they don't have any sort of leader like Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah in Hezbollah in Lebanon. That was a charismatic and a very different figure. by far in this conflict that they could assassinate him. But right now, with the same type of strategy, do you think that what they want to do with Yemenis, are they capable of doing this? And what would be the outcome for them if they go in that direction?
So how did the decapitation of Hezbollah work out? Did Hezbollah stop fighting? No. Did Hezbollah curl up into a fetal position and start crying and said, "Oh, it's over. We're done"? No. The concept of decapitation strategy is sort of foolish. It's not a silver bullet. And yeah, they take out what passes for Houthi leadership right now. You got to say what comes next. It's one thing if you say, "Oh, we're going to have somebody who's more amenable to our demands," but you could also wind up with somebody who's more compulsive, less concerned about restraint or not thinking about political implications. So yeah, it's a stupid policy. But the West does it too. They want to get rid of Vladimir Putin. Question is, then what? Can you imagine what would be happening if Medvedev was in charge now? I think there'd be some glowing cities with nuclear radiation in the United States and in Europe if Medvedev was in place. He's been far less patient than Putin.
I think right now the main doubt in the West Asia, in the West Asia, in the countries located in the Middle East, they're thinking of what would be the policy of Donald Trump in the Middle East and the way that he's going to talk with Netanyahu. Because so far with the Biden administration, we learned that Biden was, as you mentioned before, they were discussing, they were not agreeing on many things, but at the end of the day, Netanyahu was able to prevail and just to overcome. But
yeah.
how is that going to work with Donald Trump?
Yeah. With Trump, on the one hand, we get the word that he and Netanyahu don't have a good relationship because of Netanyahu's actions in the wake of the 2020 election when he went running to Joe Biden's side. And then we hear the other story. Oh, Trump and Netanyahu are great buddies. They're great friends. I don't know what to believe. Despite claims that that Biden and Netanyahu didn't get along. Did Biden withhold weapons? Did Biden put a stop to the bombing of the Palestinians in Gaza? Did Biden force the Israelis to open up the borders and allow humanitarian aid to go forward? Did Israel pay any price whatsoever for destroying all those hospitals and mosques and schools and killing UN workers? So, a lot of this about, oh, Trump's going to be so much worse than Biden. And, Israel got everything. The only thing left is for the U.S. to give Israel nuclear weapons, and Israel has those. So, if anything, I think there's actually a possibility, because Trump wants to be liked by everyone. He wants to be liked by the Turks, by the Saudis. He'd even like to be liked by the Iranians. And if he sees Israel's position as making the United States more isolated and more unliked, I don't rule out the possibility that they're going to that he may actually put pressure on Israel to back off and stop doing some of what it's doing, just in order so that Trump can be better liked. I mean, it sounds childish, but I think there is an element of that.
Who has the upper hand in Syria, Turkey or United States together with Israel?
Oh, Turkey. You know, the United States, again, we're facing the United States being stretched thin. Hell, we can't even stop the Houthis. We just pulled, the United States once again withdrew an aircraft carrier for some unexplained reason. You know, some speculate it was under threat and they couldn't defend it. So for whatever reason, they pulled out. And the Houthis are still there firing missiles. Yeah, Israel's bombing the hell out of them.
Dynamite slow.
But the Houthis are still fighting. And Israel doesn't have the military force. The only way you're going to stop the Houthis is you're going to have to invade the country and take total control of it. Good luck. You're going to need about a 400,000 man army to do that. I don't see the United States ponying up those kinds of, you know, number one, that'd max out the total number of people we have in the army right now. So, you know, this people play too many video games and think that they can, you know, get magic lives and get an immediate power up through achieving some particular goal. It doesn't work that way in the real world. Not at all.
It seems that they're counting on those forces in Yemen that are closer to Qatar. And if that would, which is, I cannot even compare Houthis with those people because they're minuscule. They don't have many forces there in Yemen. But at the end of the day, it seems to me that they're trying to do something within Yemen and their society. Is that going to work? How do you see Qatar together with Saudi Arabia right now? Are they going to go with the plan coming from the United States and Israel?
Well, that's been the plan for last 10 years, right? How's that worked? Houthis surrendered, right? Oh, no, actually, the Houthis got stronger. You know, Saudi Arabia doesn't have an army. You know, they don't have a bunch of people lined up to say, "Oh my God," you know, they're Saudi Arabian nationalists. You know, they're singing the Saudi national anthem and weeping over the Saudi flag, and you have this great legacy of history about Saudi Arabia. You know, it's a bunch of rich guys that oppress a bunch of poor people. And actually, the poor people aren't that poor. They make money too. The only ones that are sort of suffering are the Shia that are working in the oil fields. So, you know, everything that the Saudis try to do militarily is contingent upon being sure that the United States is going to have their back. And I think everybody has made a very bad assumption that the United States has better military capability than is the reality.
Larry, with the situation in Ukraine right now, do you think that today Putin was talking with Lukashenko, Belarus? They were talking about deploying Oreshnik to Belarus. How do you see the way that they're trying to manage the situation between the two countries? Do they really feel that the West is going to escalate the situation? That's why they're doing this?
Well, the West is clearly trying to escalate the situation in the last days of the Biden administration. You know, the stepped up terrorist attacks. But, you know, they are escalating verbally. But in terms of actual military operations on the ground, it's just the opposite. They're getting crushed in Kursk. The forces in Kursk are dying at an increasing rate. You know, they're dying 300 to 400 a day. You know, that starts adding up. You know, you get in 1 week, you're talking, you know, 25 to 3,000 a week, 12,000 a month. Right now, the statistics show, again, it was collected by the Russian Ministry of Defense, and if anything, I think they understate it. But for 2024 alone, Ukraine has suffered over 546,000 killed and wounded. More than 500,000. Phenomenal numbers. It's something the West has no comprehension of, no grasp. Think of it this way. Those losses, I think that was the total size of the British Army in World War II. That's like having the entire British Army wiped out in 1 year. So the war is going badly for Ukraine, badly for NATO, and they're trying to figure out a way to, take all that bad news and turn it into good news.
Yeah, on the day that we had drone attack on Russia on Kazan, we talk with you and me and Scott, we talk about it. But right now, when you look at the director of CIA, Bill Burns, visit to Kiev and talking with Zelensky, in your opinion, what was the main reason for that?
I have no idea. Excuse me, I think I'm getting ready to sneeze here. Well, my nose. Burns is either trying to deal with, I was either sent there to get a real sense of, are these guys completely delusional and out of touch with reality? Or was he there to deliver a message saying, hey, look, there's no further assistance coming and you got to be prepared to meet the end? The CIA involvement in Ukraine is pretty remarkable. I was talking with another CIA buddy. The reports are in the Western media that there were like 21 CIA bases in Ukraine. Now, to put this into context, I think the total number of bases that were in Afghanistan during the almost 20 years the United States was in Afghanistan fighting was, 6, maybe 8. So you got 3 times the number of bases in Ukraine. Doing what? Were they connected with all this biological research? Probably. But, that's an enormous number. I think we may not have even had that many CIA bases in Vietnam during the Vietnam War. So there's something with respect to the relationship between the CIA and Ukraine that has made Ukraine sort of this linchpin of CIA strategy. And that's fallen apart. It was, maybe it was also, you could come up that Burns was there to reassure, Zelensky, we got your back. And if things fall apart, we've got a nice apartment for you in Florida. You can come, we'll protect you. Maybe something like that. But they certainly also could have been discussing false flags. Let us lay out for you the kind of false flags that we're going to operate in hopes of achieving actions that will precipitate broader NATO involvement in Ukraine. So there's a whole variety of things you can come up with. I didn't get the brief.
We know that the policy right now, the rhetoric on the part of the Biden administration is to put Ukraine in a better position in order to negotiate with Russia at the end of the day. And the same rhetoric coming out of the people who are going to work, Keith Kellogg, who's going to work with Donald Trump. Is that going to be, if they're going to do that, in your opinion, are they going to send more mercenaries? Because so far we know the capabilities of the Ukrainian army.
Mm-hmm.
And they need, if they want to do that, in addition to sending more weapons, more aid to Ukraine, there has to be some sort of trained forces that are fighting Russians. Is that going to bring new mercenaries to Ukraine?
Yeah, well, mercenaries aren't trained forces. I don't care. You can go out and hire some guys who, spent the last 20 years in the U.S. military and throw them into a unit that they have not trained together. So just having individual skills doesn't translate into group skills, number one. Number two, there's nothing the West can do in terms of delivering manpower or weaponry that's going to change the outcome of this war. That's what they need to get their minds around. You go back and use World War II as an example, that you could make the case that with the Battle of Stalingrad, that marked the end of the Third Reich. Everything else after that was inevitable. Yeah, there was a lot of fighting, a lot of dying that went on. Or the Battle of Kursk, maybe that was the turning point, ultimate turning point, the point of no return, or Bagration. But but you could see, you go back and you look at it and you realize that even if Germany had somehow, they didn't have an unlimited supply of men, and the quality of the troops that were going into the German ranks was declining over time. Any country that's experienced losses, like Ukraine runs into that. And it's something that we've failed to consider, that when you've got a war of high attrition with a lot of people being killed and wounded, that you've got, you have to do some pre-planning, because to properly train somebody to go to war, you're looking at an 18-month process. And I would, if anybody's ever watched HBO's miniseries Band of Brothers, you see all these guys show up for paratroop training. It's really the summer of 1942. And yet they don't go into combat until June of 1944. So we're talking almost 2 years of training. And in that period of training, they had to learn the basic individual skills, how to shoot, how to properly dress, how to take care of your mother nature needs in the field, but then how to communicate, how to move as a unit, how to operate as a unit, how to carry out complex maneuvers. Took 2 years to learn all that. Well, the Ukrainians don't have 2 years. And they don't really have people in the pipeline now that are getting the kind of training so that when they're done with the training, that they're plugged into units, because even then, they're green, they're replacements. They don't have prior experience. They don't have prior knowledge. They don't know what to do. Where somebody who's survived, they've got some, the knowledge that only comes through experience. So what's the West going to do? Even they say, okay, yeah, we're going to deploy the 82nd Airborne. Good luck with that. They've never fought in a war like this. They haven't trained to fight in a war like this. The United States is not ready to fight a war with they're being attacked by drones every day, every hour. Let's just say this is just this kind of absurdity. Our current generation of leaders, if you want to call them that, have been raised on video games. And, they think these are video games with cheat codes. And they're not. It's reality.
What's so amazing that we've learned that Zelensky was trying to bribe Fico from Slovakia in order to change his mind toward the conflict in Ukraine. Larry, it's unbelievable. You see the fund coming from the West, from the European countries, going to Ukraine, Ukrainian president trying to bribe the same people who gave.
Yeah.
How ridiculous is that? And what he was going to achieve with that? I don't know how many European leaders have received that, if that was the case for them as well.
Well, again, it just speaks of desperation. Only someone who's has no other options. That's what they do. And as you correctly note, it's counterproductive. If anything, it's sort of off-putting. The other leaders go, good God, I'm not going to be bought and paid for by this guy. And so he gives them the money. Then what? What Fico's going to turn around and say, oh yeah, we're sending the Czech army into Ukraine. Fine, they get chewed up. They've never fought a war like this. They are not prepared to fight a war like this. That's what the West spent from 2015, after the Battle of Debaltseve and the signing of the Minsk II agreements, the West embarked on a massive training upgrade and providing training, providing supplies to Ukraine, because they knew exactly what they wanted, that this was going to culminate in a war with Russia. They wanted them to be prepared to defeat Russia. They were going to become NATO's proxy army. That plan failed. But they had, 7 years to build that force up and get it trained. And Ukraine had probably the largest army in Europe, as long as you don't count Turkey part of Europe. I think maybe Turkey's army would have been a little bit larger, but not much. The only other one that could be comparable in size would be the U.S. military. So that's, they failed. The West failed.
Just to wrap up this session, Larry, do you understand how the United Kingdom, which is not part of the European Union, has so much leverage on them?
Yeah. Must have pictures of everybody's leader sleeping with a sheep or something, naked with an animal. A lot of bestiality going on. It could be the money. London still is somewhat of a financial center, and those countries are dependent upon the money. That could be one of the reasons. But you're starting to see, the thing's starting to come apart. They're not all singing, Michael, row your boat ashore, and rowing on sink. Everybody's sort of man overboard, save yourself. That's the stage we're coming to.
Thank you so much, Larry, for being with us today. Great pleasure.
Welcome back to the channel. Today is Saturday, December the 28th, and this is my only video update of the day. This is what I would call a fully packed episode because we have 6 news stories and they're all very important. Besides the usual lies and propaganda, which we consistently get from the Western mainstream media, we also have a new narrative. And this new narrative is paving the way for Ukraine to execute a full withdrawal out of Kursk. By the looks of it, my friends, the plans have been drawn up, and it's only going to be a matter of time until Ukraine fully withdraws from Kursk. Like I said, these are all important news stories, so in no particular order, let's go over to Ukrainska Pravda, the beacon of democracy, and just get our daily dose of truth. Putin ordered Fico to open second energy front against Ukraine, says Zelensky. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, whose mandate has expired over 7 months ago, my apologies, that was not in the article, that was me, has responded to Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico's threats to shut off electricity supply to Ukraine due to Kyiv's decision to suspend Russian gas transit after 2024. First of all, Vladimir Putin hasn't ordered Robert Fico anything. Robert Fico doesn't answer to Vladimir Putin. He answers to the people of Slovakia. And it's in the Slovakian people's interest to actually buy the Russian gas because it's a lot cheaper than other Western alternatives. It's really that simple. Now, where does Volodymyr Zelensky come into the picture? Well, just a week ago, he announced that he will fully stop the Russian gas transit through Ukraine and into Slovakia. That means that Slovakia, from the 1st of January of 2025, won't be able to purchase the Russian gas. This would mean much higher costs for the people of Slovakia. It leaves Slovakia at an energy risk. But Volodymyr Zelensky, he says, well, no, Putin ordered Fico to open an energy front against Ukraine. No, the reason Fico is doing it is because Zelensky has decided unilaterally that he's going to make the decisions for the people of Slovakia. And this is the only response that Fico had for Zelensky. If you're going to stop my gas, I'm going to stop your electricity. Putin has absolutely zilch, nada to do with all of this story. Let's continue, my friends. Quote, it appears that Putin gave Fico the order to open the second energy front against Ukraine at the expense of the Slovak people's interest. Fico's threats to cut off Ukraine's emergency power supply this winter while Russia attacks our power plants and energy grid can only be explained by this, the Ukrainian president tweeted. My friends, I've always considered myself a very simple man, and I'm always guided by a very simple principle. Usually, the most obvious explanation is the correct one. And the most obvious explanation for this is that Fico's decision to cut off Ukraine from the emergency power is a response to Zelensky's decision to cut off Slovakia from the Russian gas. This is the simplest thing. But Volodymyr Zelensky, he has to interject Vladimir Putin and to insert Vladimir Putin into all of this matter. Vladimir Putin has nothing to do with it. Vladimir Putin told Fico that if he still wants to buy the Russian gas, well, he's happy to sell it, but Volodymyr Zelensky says no, because in between Russian gas and Slovakia, there's me, the green t-shirt, and I'm not gonna allow it. This is really what's going on. Quote, second, Fico's short-sighted policy has already deprived the Slovak people of compensation for losing Russian gas transit. It now risks depriving the Slovaks of another 200 million per year, which Ukraine pays for the imported electricity, Zelensky added. Long story very short is that according to Robert Fico, Volodymyr Zelensky offered him 500 million euros in compensation from the frozen Russian assets, by the way, but with a caveat. And that caveat was that Slovakia needed to back Ukraine's NATO membership up. Robert Fico declined. But even if you completely disregard this story and just put it on the back of, well, these are just Fico's allegations and nothing will ever be proven, even so, those 500 million euros would have only covered Slovakia's losses for 1 year, not for eternity. It wasn't going to be an amount that's going to be paid to Slovakia each year for the loss of the Russian gas. It's as simple as that. And now Volodymyr Zelensky is trying to get the Slovakian people riled up against Robert Fico because Robert Fico is costing them money. No, what's going on here is that Volodymyr Zelensky and the European Union are working in unison to push Slovakia and Hungary as well, but they're having an easier time in Slovakia to push them into a corner where Slovakia would need to back Ukraine up. This is just about forcing someone into submission. That's really what it is. And if politics doesn't do it, well, that's when they make statements such as this one that appeal to the masses, that appeal to the people. People who don't keep up with politics would read the Zelensky statement and think, well, this makes sense. Robert Fico is costing us money. But in reality, things couldn't be further from the truth. My friends, let's take a look at the very last statement. Quote, Slovakia is part of the single European energy market and Fico must respect common European rules. Any arbitrary decision in Bratislava or Moscow's orders to Fico regarding electricity cannot cut Ukraine's power supply, but they can certainly cut current Slovak authorities' ties to the European community, Zelensky concluded. By the European community, he means, of course, the clique in Brussels. That's really what it is. He's telling Robert Fico off for not wanting to be part of the club, for not wanting to participate at the round table in Brussels. Well, actually, it's not round at all because there's nothing democratic about it. It's a top-down system that is only serving as a tool to implement some other people's interest. That's really what it is. It's nothing democratic about it. People sometimes ask me in the comment sections, hey Seb, why are you so anti-West? I am not anti-West by default, by nature. I always grew up thinking that the West is a great place and that Europe is a great place to live in. However, things have changed for the worst in the last 20 years to the point where this place is barely recognizable. If you haven't paid attention to European politics in ever or in a long time, well, this is probably why some people still think that what we see here is the embodiment of democracy. Whereas me, personally, I view things very, very differently. I don't think there's many things that we can still call democratic in this part of the world. Like I just said, it's a top-down system from Brussels down. Take a look at Volodymyr Zelensky's language, and this will make everything very clear. He's saying, no arbitrary decision in Bratislava. What do you mean arbitrary decision? Bratislava, that's where Slovakia's decisions should be made, not in Brussels, because Slovakia is is a sovereign state, my friends. It's a sovereign state that shouldn't take orders from the European Union or from anybody else. But you see, if you want to be sovereign, if you want to make your own decisions, well, Putin ordered you to, because there is no conceivable way in which a country can make its own decisions. This is how the green t-shirt thinks. And the reason he thinks that way is because that's exactly how the people around him think. And who are the people around him? Well, they're not Yermak and the likes. He spends far more time next to Mark Rutte, next to Ursula, and all of these people than he spends next to his general staff. My friends, let's move over to the next article because I think I've already taken way too much time with this one. And this one is about Ukraine's foreign ministry outlines timeline for second peace summit. Ukraine has completed preparatory work for hosting the second peace summit, but its timing will depend on how productive the event is expected to be. Well, first of all, Ukraine is not going to host a single thing because this event cannot take place in Ukraine, in Russia, or anywhere in the West. And the reason is very simple. All of these are already party to the conflict. The event is supposed to be hosted by a nation, a third-party nation, who's not party to the conflict in any way, shape, or form. This is why the location has not been discussed yet. There's also another reason for why nobody put their hand up saying, we want to host it, and that's because they cannot trust the West, the world cannot trust the West to actually do right by this event. And they might end up in a situation similar to the one in Switzerland in June of 2024, where a peace summit was organized, but without Russia being invited, which was an epic disaster. What was the point of having a peace summit if you're not inviting both parties to the conflict? This is why it's taking so long. But you see, Ukrainska Pravda is saying that, well, it depends on how productive it's expected to be. Well, it depends on how productive you want it to be. Let's continue. Quote, Ukraine has prepared everything necessary for the second peace summit. All thematic conversations have been held, coordinating joint positions on the points of the peace formula. Ukraine, as of now, is in a strong diplomatic position because all preparations have been completed. This is a great example of how to speak a lot without actually saying much of anything. The reason they think Ukraine is in a strong diplomatic position is because they have the backing of the collective West. Their positions are very, very similar, which they think will put Ukraine in a strong position. Here's the caveat. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if Mark Rutte or Ursula or anybody on the face of the earth backs Ukraine at the negotiating table. Because the only thing that determines which way the wind is blowing or which way these negotiations are going to go is the reality on the ground. And by the ground, I don't mean the ground in the UK, the ground in Ukraine. And that's where Ukraine is suffering setback after setback. That by itself, by default, puts you on the back foot, not in a strong diplomatic position. These people, they tend to remove the diplomatic side from the battlefield. And to a certain extent, I understand why they're doing it, and it's normal to do it. But on the other hand, you can't completely treat it as its own separate thing, because it's not. Diplomacy will always be influenced in situations like this by what's going on the battlefield, not the other way around. Let's continue. At the same time, Tiki noted that achieving productive results from the summit requires additional preparation. And this one is Georgi Tiki, spokesman for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine. The reason he's saying that additional preparations need to be made is because they don't want to negotiate. He understands, Mr. T, he understands that once they sit down with Vladimir Putin, they will be on the back foot. The West doesn't have leverage over Russia. What leverage could they possibly have? They've already imposed over 25,000 sanctions, and let's imagine that the West offers itself to remove some of those sanctions, because let's make one thing clear, they will never ever remove all of them. Even so, is that so important to Russia? Maybe, but I don't think so. Because with many of those sanctions, Russia has learned to live already. They found alternative supply chains, and for the ones that they couldn't find supply chains, they've developed their own. So I don't understand how much leverage does the West think it has over Russia. My friends, let's move over to the next article, and this one, it's about Zelensky. Well, this is a very quick one. This is a prime example of how to say certain things just to make sure that nobody will ever take you seriously. Check this out. Zelensky, if China is genuine in its statements, it must influence Pyongyang. I was expecting to see Russia instead of Pyongyang, because that's what Zelensky has been telling us for the last 3 years. If China is serious, then it needs to exert political pressure over Russia. Well, all of a sudden, he's given up on that idea. He's now switching it to Pyongyang. Why? Why? Should we abide by the same principle when we talk about the United States? Well, look, if the US is serious, they should exert political pressure over Ukraine. Of course not, because that's not allowed, you see. You can never tell the West what to do, but surely you can tell the rest of the world exactly what they have to do. Because, you know, the rest of the world, it's just supposed to listen to the West, because the West desire should be command for China. President Volodymyr Zelensky has held a meeting of the staff of the Supreme Commander-in-Chief to discuss the situation on the front line. He noted that if China is genuine in its statements that the war should not escalate, it must exert appropriate influence in Pyongyang. No, it really shouldn't, for so many reasons, but I'll name the most obvious two. Number one, North Korea is a sovereign country, which means that China has absolutely zero business interfering in North Korea. Second most obvious reason is that in between Russia and North Korea, there's a defense treaty which states that if Russia is under attack, North Korea has to intervene. Has. Not can, but has to intervene with all of the means at their disposal. And vice versa. If North Korea would be under attack, Russia would have to bring all of their military might in support of North Korea. What has China to do with anything? Of course, nothing, but again, Zelensky is trying to apply the European politics dynamics to an area of the world where they do not belong. You see, this is exactly, he gives you a snippet into how things work in Europe. This is how they work. If you have a little bit more power as a country, whoever that is, well, then you're expected to interfere in everyone's business. This is a prime example of what's going on in Europe. This is why I said it's a top-down system. There's nothing democratic about it. Nobody respects anybody else. And surely nobody respects anybody's sovereignty. That's how things are really in Europe. This is the answer to those people who occasionally ask me why I continuously criticize the West. Well, what would be the point, my friends, in criticizing someone else, say, for example, Russia? Everybody criticizes Russia. Turn on BBC, CNN, all of these news outlets. They lie about Russia to the point when, even when they say something honest, nobody believes them, because they've lost all credibility. But I'm not concerned about Russia because I don't live in Russia. I live in the West. I live in Europe. I want Europe to do well. But with these people in charge, this place will be very, very bad. It already is bad, but it can get much, much worse. Let's continue. If Russia escalates pressure in Kursk Oblast, Ukraine's forces may retreat, says Bloomberg. Anonymous US officials believe that should Russia intensify its efforts to push Ukrainian forces out of Kursk Oblast from the start of the new year, the Ukrainian armed forces may need to retreat by spring of 2025 to avoid encirclement. This was very much expected, and it's hardly a surprise. In fact, the only surprising thing is that they're admitting to it and they're openly talking about it. My friends, Vladimir Putin was never in a rush to push the Ukrainians out of Kursk. He was in a rush to contain them, to stop the spread, but he was not in a rush to drive them out of Kursk. And I'll explain why. You see, for Zelensky, it was important to stay in Kursk because that gave him the headlines, and in the eyes of the world, well, he was doing well. But also, it guaranteed that Russia will never negotiate while Ukraine is still in Kursk, which is exactly what Zelensky wants to hear. But on the other hand, Vladimir Putin, if you want to be a little bit more cynical, you could think that, okay, well, this works for Vladimir Putin as well. Because as long as Ukraine is in Kursk, he gets to push everywhere else and just get more territory in Ukraine. From this, there's only one loser. And that loser, believe it or not, is not Zelensky or Vladimir Putin, is Ukraine. Because the Kursk operation comes at the cost, at a territory cost for Ukraine, for the Ukrainian people. And when I say Ukrainian people, the last people I'm referring to are the green t-shirt and his clique. This is exactly what's going on in Kursk. So maybe, who knows, maybe Donald Trump told Zelensky, look, you gotta get out of there because otherwise you're gonna keep losing more territory. There can also be some other things. Because they're losing territory at such a fast rate in the east of Ukraine, the green t-shirt has finally made the decision to pull those troops out of Kursk and reinforce the Eastern Front. Because the Eastern Front for Ukraine is an absolute disaster. It's a total disaster. They're getting swept all across the front. So, my friends, let's continue because we have some statements here. One official noted that Ukrainian troops have already held their position in Kursk longer than initially anticipated, partly due to the US decision to allow Kiev to launch long-range missile strikes on Russian territory. Another official suggested that Ukraine never intended to maintain control over Kursk, meaning that the retreat could still be framed as a tactical success. Well, that's a blatant lie. Of course, Volodymyr Zelensky wanted to keep hold of that territory in Kursk for as long as humanly possible, and I've explained why. Now, I appreciate he did not imagine or envisage that that territory will become part of Ukraine. I mean, you would have to be a special kind of special to really believe such a thing. However, do you notice what they're saying there? Could still be framed as a tactical success. For these people, it's all about framing. It's not about substance. It's not about essence. It's about how it looks. It's all about the packaging. It's all about the wrapping on how it looks at a first glance. This is why they will always fail, because they don't pay attention to the things that matter, because they're far too concerned with how the narrative is. The only place where the West and Ukraine are winning is in the narrative war, in the media. On the battlefield and in diplomacy, they fail miserably. And this is why. That's where their priorities lie. Two US officials expressed hope that President Volodymyr Zelensky would order the withdrawal early enough to avoid significant losses. This line right here made me think that maybe, just maybe, Donald Trump has something to do with it. Because by the looks of it, two US officials are expressing hope that Zelensky will pull his troops out before getting encircled. That's a message, my friends. That's how a message in the media sounds. They're basically signaling to Zelensky, pull your troops out before you lose them like you've done in so many other places. Don't be foolish. And that's why I'm thinking that maybe this is part of something that Donald Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky discussed, or maybe they haven't discussed. Maybe this is Donald Trump sending an indirect message to Zelensky. It's very hard to tell at this point in time. However, both things could be true at the same time. He could also want to do this, but he's looking for an out. And it's always better for the green t-shirt to look as if someone else has a hand in it. At least that way, he doesn't take the fall by himself. My friends, let's move over to the next article, and this one is the type of article that really gets your blood pressure up. Gas prices in Europe surge as Putin casts doubt on new transit agreement, says Bloomberg. European natural gas prices have spiked after
The situation of the Ukrainian army and NATO forces continues to deteriorate rapidly along the entire combat contact line. It is reported that the Russian army has achieved significant success in all key areas of the front over the past 5 days. The Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation also officially confirmed this fact. In particular, a few hours ago, the Russian Defense Ministry officially announced the liberation of 2 strategically important settlements in the Kharkiv region and the Donetsk People's Republic. We are talking about Zagrezovo, in the eastern part of the Kharkiv region, and Ivanovka, located in the northwestern part of the Donetsk People's Republic. Simultaneously with this, on December 28, at 5 p.m. Moscow time, war correspondents also reported Russian troops liberating the strategically important settlement of Dachinskoye, south of the city of Pokrovsk. It is reported that the liberation of this settlement allowed the Russian army to fully align the offensive battle line south of Pokrovsk and create a fairly powerful bridgehead along the entire line, connecting settlements such as Shevchenko, Vozrozhdeny, Lisovka, and Dachinskoye. Against this backdrop, the Ukrainian army units have completely lost the ability to strike at the flanks of Russian troops in this direction of the front. By the way, in Pokrovsk itself, the Ukrainian military stated that the Russian army began regularly shelling the positions of the Ukrainian troops in the southern, central, and even northern parts of the city. According to them, starting from December 26, Russian artillery and combat aviation have been striking the city non-stop. All this indicates that the Russian army is carefully preparing to storm this strategically important settlement. Many military experts expressed confidence that Russian troops would launch an assault on Pokrovsk immediately after the Russian artillery and combat aviation took under fire control of all supply routes for the Ukrainian garrison in the city. Representatives of the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation also commented on the situation in the Kursk region. In particular, they officially stated that over the past 24 hours, the Ukrainian army had lost 500 soldiers, 6 mortars, 7 pickup trucks, 2 infantry fighting vehicles, and 1 American Abrams tank in the Kursk region. It is reported that in just 5 months of fighting in the Kursk region, the Ukrainian army lost 45,000 soldiers, 340 artillery pieces, 1,300 pickup trucks, 1,400 armored fighting vehicles, 150 armored personnel carriers, 230 infantry fighting vehicles, and 260 tanks. According to war correspondents, as of December 2024, the Ukrainian army had lost 70% of the controlled territory in the Kursk region. At the moment, only 800 square kilometers of territory are under the control of Ukrainian troops. It is reported that almost every day the Ukrainian army loses its positions in this Russian region. Against this backdrop, the Bloomberg news agency, citing its own sources in the White House, said that the Russian army would completely knock out units of the Ukrainian army from the Kursk region in the next 8-12 weeks. Moreover, an unnamed source in the White House also told reporters from Bloomberg that against the backdrop of the successful advance of the Russian army in all directions of the front, Moscow is likely to delay the negotiation process with the Trump administration in order to take control of as much Ukrainian territory as possible. The White House is confident that the Kremlin will agree to start negotiations with Kyiv only after the Kursk region is completely liberated, and the entire territory of Donbass, including the adjacent settlements of the Dnipropetrovsk region, will come under the full control of the Russian army. At the same time, representatives of the Biden administration admitted that only thanks to the permission to fire Western long-range missiles deep into Russian territory, allowed the Ukrainian army to stay in the Kursk region for more than 5 months. Meanwhile, on the night of December 28, the Russian aerospace forces, together with missile forces, launched another bomb and rocket attack on military installations in Ukraine. It is noteworthy that this bomb and rocket attack was carried out immediately after a meeting between General Valery Gerasimov and representatives of the military intelligence took place at the Russian General Staff. Insiders report that during this closed-door meeting, Chief of the General Staff of the Armed Forces of the Russian Federation, General Valery Gerasimov, listened to a report from military intelligence representatives on the identified secret places for the deployment of active-duty NATO officers, who launch Western long-range missiles deep into Russian territory. It is reported that as soon as representatives of military intelligence left the General Staff building, the Russian armed forces dealt a crushing blow to military facilities located in the territories of such regions as Kiev, Zaporizhia, Sumy, and Kharkiv. So, in the Kiev region, Russian ballistic and cruise missiles hit and destroyed several weapons depots in such settlements as Borispol, Bila Tserkva, Yagotina, and Obakova. It is reported that Western ballistic and cruise missiles were located in these weapons depots. In the Zaporizhia region, in the southwestern part of the city of Zaporizhia, Russian missiles hit and destroyed a local enterprise that was repairing damaged heavy equipment of the Ukrainian army. In the Sumy region, Russian guided aerial bombs of the Fab family hit several targets, where the Ukrainian High Military Command was pulling heavy equipment for its subsequent transfer to the Kursk region. And finally, in the Kharkiv region, the Russian military prevented the launch of American ATACMS ballistic missiles deep into the Kursk and Bryansk regions. In particular, it is reported that Russian intelligence managed to determine the exact location of the place for the deployment of NATO officers, in settlement of Dergachi, northwest of Kharkiv. We are talking about an abandoned building of one of the local enterprises. Immediately after that, this building was razed to the ground with the help of Fab 500 guided aerial bombs. Later, sources in the Russian military department said that as a result of this attack, 15 officers of the Ukrainian Security Service and 5 officers of the British Army were destroyed. It is reported that these active-duty NATO officers plan to launch a missile attack on the Kursk and Bryansk regions on December 31st. However, thanks to the professional actions of Russian intelligence and the aerospace forces, this treacherous attack on New Year's Eve was stopped in time.
It's been a minute. Some new information here in regards to what's going on with these drones, or what they want to call UFOs, UAPs. They're mixing it all up, if you can tell. And it seems like they're still stonewalling the public. They're refusing to tell us what's really going on. And it's a big setup, as always. But it's pretty obvious they know what's going on. And there's no way that they don't. This new pattern has emerged. When you're looking at the maps, you can see very clearly that not only are these drones coming in over top of American cities, but it's military bases. And it's not just a military base in America. They're going after these bases all over the place. In the UK and Germany, all of these other allied countries are seeing the same thing. And it's been going on for months. So the disturbing pattern that has emerged here is basically that we're the ones, our military bases are the ones being targeted. So people want to say out there, well, it can't be the United States then. Well, it can be. They could very well be practicing encroaching in on bases with their own stuff over their own bases because they can get away with it. Where else are they going to train and practice it? If we are being held hostage by another country, it is game over. If that's the only other scenario, it's either your government or it's not. If it's not our government, it's another government, and we're screwed because they've got everything. They got everything that our government's got that they shouldn't have. But, you know, your government comes out and tells you that the Chinese are all inside of our telecoms and they can't get them out, even in the DOD wiretaps. How does it happen? How does a building come down that was never hit? Huh? I think you already know. It's the same hands behind it. Huge events about to go into motion. All before inauguration to set the stage here. And all these other people falling for traps left and right. That's a whole nother talk, a whole nother video right there. But it seems that this isn't going away. The drone incursions happening still on a nightly basis. There's no solid answers. All we do know is that there is a pattern of them going over United States military bases. And they're not doing nothing but creeping up and like just being there. You could say they're scanning the area, observing the area, but it's not like the UFOs of past that would creep up and shut down a missile silo, shut down the entire base. That's not happening. They're obviously drones with a new technology attached to them where they can go at very fast speeds, where they got a battery life or a gas tank that can outrun our military aircraft, and where they cannot be picked up on a thermal image. But they're drones. So they've incorporated all this UFO, UAP type of tech, bits of it, into the drones now, and you're seeing it on display. So only a matter of time before one of these things come down full scale and we see what it's made of. In the meantime, it looks like this is a massive black operation for sure. That's why 4C being behind this. They're the ones, you know, DARPAs and all them Palantirs, they're the ones that make this stuff and specialize in it and test it and roll it out. The biggest thing is that your government's lying to you. Will Trump tell you on January 20th, when he's sworn in, will he tell you the truth, knowing that he will know every bit of what's going on with it? Or will something huge happen before then? I guess we're on the clock here. Time's ticking. And inauguration coming up fast. Head on a swivel, guys, is all I could say. And if you guys see anything in the sky, get any images, any footage, anything like that, let me know. WW7@yahoo.com. I'd love to share it, analyze it, see what we're working with. There's a big difference between some of these objects out there, obviously, between drones, UFOs, orbs, and all that. So keep fighting the fight, guys. And keep your head up.
The Vatican, and they are opening up these 5 holy sacred portals. I said in those videos, we are seeing and hearing a lot of portal news stories and a lot of portal imagery as of 2024. Matter of fact, if you go through my video history, you'll know that I made plenty of videos on this topic when it comes to different news stories and portals. Again, as of 2024, there has actually been another interesting news story involving portals. And I really did not want to talk about this story or make a video about it, but I made an interesting connection right back to CERN. Now, of course, anytime there is a CERN story or a connection to CERN, I will be all over it. But anyway, what am I talking about? I am reading this article from Popular Mechanics. This article was published on December 23rd, 2024. And remember, this is also all around the same time of the Vatican opening up these 5 holy sacred portals. So I am sure this is all one big quote-unquote quinkerdinker. But anyway, the title of this article happens to be, Scientists Are Pretty Sure They Found a Portal to the 5th Dimension. The particle helping them find or open up this 5th dimension would be something called fermions, which would act like dark matter. And this article goes on to say that dark matter could be the result of fermions pushed into a warped 5th dimension. Now, I'm not going to go ahead and read the whole article, but it also says that this theory builds on an idea first stated in 1999, but is unique in its findings. And this is usually seen in multiple strange news stories where they'll go ahead and state something that's absolutely strange in a first, but they'll also mention something happening in the past to make it seem like it's a normal occurrence. The article goes on to say that scientists say they can explain dark matter by positioning a particle that links to a 5th dimension. These studies seek to explain the presence of dark matter using a WED model. These scientists studied fermion masses, which they believe could be communicated into the 5th dimension through portals creating dark matter relics and fermionic dark matter. Why does it sound like demonic? But anyway, within the 5th dimension. So it sounds like they want to create dark matter relics, which in actuality, to them anyway, is a portal, quote unquote, particles. So the question happens to be, what is this dark matter and where are they getting it from? What is this 5th dimension? Because they say that while dark matter makes up most of the known universe, dark matter is difficult to observe, or scientists have so far not been able to observe dark matter. So this is where I'm reminded of a story. This is where I'm reminded of CERN and made that CERN connection, because on April 8th, the day of the solar eclipse, CERN was active. They had fired up the Large Hadron Collider. They said that supposedly, anyway, they fired up the Large Hadron Collider on April 5th because they were ahead of schedule. But I believe they changed that date because a lot of people were asking, why is CERN starting up on the day of the solar eclipse? But anyway, it does not matter what day they actually started the Large Hadron Collider, because the Large Hadron Collider was active on the day of the solar eclipse, April 8th. And what were they doing? Well, CERN was hunting and looking for dark matter. Multiple news agencies were talking about this, but I'm reading this article from the Daily Mail, which was published on March 28th, 2024. And this article is titled, CERN to test the world's most powerful particle accelerator during April's solar eclipse to search for invisible matter that secretly powers our universe. So on the day of the solar eclipse, CERN was smashing particles together to search for this dark matter. And in this article here, it states that now the team has restarted the LHC with hopes of unraveling more mysteries of the universe, specifically dark matter. The article continues to say, on April 8th, the team will send the beams through the tunnel where they will collide. The team will be on the hunt for dark matter, which makes up around 28% of our massive universe, but it has never been seen or proven. This work will give them insights into the formation of the universe and even its ultimate fate. The experiment is scheduled to occur on the same day as the Great North American Solar Eclipse. Their answer as to why they are hunting for this dark matter during the solar eclipse was to help them understand further what came before the Big Bang and during the Big Bang. But does anybody honestly believe that CERN is spending billions of dollars and all this energy just to get an answer for the Big Bang? I mean, if you honestly believe that, all you have to do is write me a check for $20,000, wait till it clears, and I'll go ahead and send you your own personal Large Hadron Collider. Of course, they are not doing all of this to get an answer for the Big Bang. But here's where things get more interesting, because on the exact same day of the solar eclipse, when the solar eclipse started on April 8th, this was the very first time that this black flying thing that I have made multiple videos on first appeared in Texas. This black thing that looks like a snake flying at high speeds in the air. But that's not all, because NASA was also active on this exact same day, firing all 3 rockets called a PEP, or the serpent, or in other words, the devil. So now we have this news article coming out on December 23rd where they say that scientists, and they never say which scientist or where they come from, but these scientists are using dark matter to open up these portals, which they are using these dark matter relics. But this isn't the first time that CERN has opened up portals or gateways to other dimensions. Remember that other news story that came out that I talk about often, where this fourth dimensional being, this ghost, this specter, which they call a neutrino or a ghost particle, came through, and it started to, I guess, fly all around the CERN laboratory. But anyway, going back to the Popular Mechanics article, it says that basically a key piece of mathematics creates bulk masses of fermions that are manifested in the so-called fifth dimensional warp space. This pocket dark sector is one possible way to explain the huge amount of dark matter that so far has eluded detection using any traditional measurements designed for the standard model of physics. Fermions jammed through a portal to a warped fifth dimension could be acting as dark matter. So essentially, it sounds like they want to use these fermions and this dark matter relic to open up this fifth dimension to allow dark matter to cross over so they can communicate and observe this dark matter. Now, again, sounds very similar to that news story that came out where CERN had this fourth dimensional specter cross over. But now we're dealing, apparently, with the fifth dimension. But let's be honest, at the end of the day, does this really surprise anybody? Because for quite some time now, we have known that CERN has been opening up gateways, portals, to allow things to come through. They have been using catalysts. How many times do they have to release the fact checkers from their toilets and sewers that they reside in to let us know that CERN is definitely not opening a portal to hell? If this is such a crazy and kooky conspiracy theory, why even fact check it or even talk about it or even bring it up? Because this is just more of truth in plain sight. Yes, they are opening up portals at CERN. Like I said, I really don't believe there are people out there that really believe that CERN is doing all of this to get an answer for the Big Bang. And they had even shown us during the 2024 closing ceremony of the Olympics, which was all about portal imagery, that there will be these things crossing over. There was all these gray entities surrounding this portal, and if you look at them close up, they look very, very bizarre. But there were all these gray beings surrounding this portal, and what was coming through but a golden Voyager. And then inside of this portal, as this golden Voyager is coming through, we have the singer singing the hymn to Apollo. And there are many theories that believe that CERN sits on top of the Temple of Apollo, or one of the locations anyway, that CERN actually stretches out to the Temple of Apollo. They are nothing more than modern day ritualists at CERN. Now, I just find it very interesting. We have another story involving portals as 2024 ends and 2025 begins with a portal opening ceremony during the year of the snake. But in any case, thank you so much for watching. If you like this channel and you want to see more, please subscribe. If you're already subscribed, please like.
Kofi, follow me.